Hey guys, tonight we're stepping away from the mortal world and into something far more ancient and mystical. Imagine for a moment that you could slip through the veil of time and become something otherworldly, something that existed when the gods still walked freely among the trees. What would it be like to wake each morning not as a human, but as one of the most enchanting beings in all of Greek mythology, a nymph dwelling in Apollo's sacred forest? Tonight, you'll discover the answer to that question as you experience life through the eyes of a forest spirit, bound to the ancient groves where sunlight and shadow dance together in eternal harmony. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video if these journeys bring you a little closer to rest. It's always a pleasure to see our community of listeners, so let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. You awaken as you always do, not to the harsh sound of human alarms or the bustling noise of a crowded city, but to the gentle stirring of consciousness that comes with the first golden rays of Apollo's chariot crossing the sky. The awareness spreads through you like honey warming in sunlight, starting from your core and radiating outward through your ethereal form until even your fingertips tingle with the awakening energy of dawn. Your eyes flutter open to reveal the familiar canopy above you, the intertwining branches of oak, laurel, and pine that have sheltered your slumber for countless centuries. The leaves whisper their morning greetings in a language older than human words, their rustling creating a symphony that only those attuned to nature's deeper rhythms can truly understand. Your bed is not one of mortal construction, but rather a soft depression among the roots of an ancient oak tree, lined with moss so velvety that it seems spun from clouds themselves. Tiny wildflowers have bloomed overnight around your resting place, violet-blue hyacinths, delicate anemones, and clusters of cyclamen that seem to glow with their own inner light. This is not coincidence, but rather the natural response of the forest to your presence. As a nymph, you are intimately connected to the life force that flows through every leaf, every blade of grass, every drop of morning dew. Where you rest, beauty flourishes. Where you walk, flowers bloom in your footsteps. It is not magic in the way mortals understand it. It is simply the natural order of things, the way the world responds to those who are part of its deepest essence. You stretch languidly, feeling the morning air caress your skin like silk. Your form is both solid and ethereal, substantial enough to touch the bark of trees and feel the cool earth beneath your feet, yet light enough that you can move through the forest without disturbing a single sleeping bird or crushing the most delicate flower. Your hair catches the morning light, taking on hues that shift between the deep green of forest shadows and the golden amber of sunbeams filtered through leaves. Some say nymph hair changes with the seasons, and perhaps it does. In spring it might shimmer with the fresh green of new growth. In summer it could deepen to the rich emerald of full foliage. In autumn it might blaze with the reds and golds of turning leaves, and in winter it could take on the crystalline silver of frost on bare branches. The forest around you is already alive with activity, though it is a different kind of movement than what fills the human world. A family of deer picks their way delicately through the underbrush nearby, their hooves making almost no sound on the carpet of fallen leaves. They acknowledge your presence with a gentle nod. Forest creatures recognize their guardians instinctively. A red squirrel chatters from a branch above, not in alarm but in greeting, its bright eyes sparkling with intelligence. Birds call to one another across the canopy, sharing the news of the day in their ancient tongue. And underneath it all, you can sense the slow, deep pulse of the trees themselves, their roots intertwined in a network of communication that spans the entire grove. This is Apollo's domain, and you are one of its most cherished inhabitants. The god of music, prophecy, healing, and light has claimed this forest as his own, and in return he has blessed it with an abundance that goes beyond the merely physical. The air itself seems to hum with potential, with creative energy, with the promise of inspiration. It is no wonder that mortal poets and musicians often report their greatest works coming to them after walking through forests sacred to Apollo. They sense, even if they cannot fully comprehend, the artistic force that permeates every inch of this woodland realm. You rise from your mossy bed with fluid grace, your movements as natural and unthinking as water flowing downhill. There is no stiffness in your limbs, no need to stretch cramped muscles or work out the kinks of an uncomfortable night's sleep. Your body exists in perfect harmony with itself and with your environment. This is one of the gifts of being a nymph. You are not fighting against nature, struggling to impose your will upon an unwilling world. Instead, you are nature, and nature is you. Every breath you take nourishes not just your own ethereal form, but also the plants around you. Every step you take strengthens the connection between the earth and sky. Every song you hum adds to the great symphony of the forest. The morning air carries 1,000 different scents, each one telling its own story to those who know how to listen with their noses. There is the green, growing smell of chlorophyll converting sunlight into life. There is the earthy richness of decomposing leaves feeding the soil for next year's growth. There is the sweet fragrance of night-blooming jasmine still lingering from the darkness hours, mixing with the crisp freshness of morning dew. Somewhere nearby, a honeysuckle vine has opened its blooms to greet the dawn, adding its nectar-sweet perfume to the complex bouquet of forest aromas. And underneath it all, you detect something that mortal noses would never catch. The clean, bright scent of divine presence, the olfactory signature that marks this grove as belonging to one of the great Olympian gods. You move toward the heart of the grove, where a natural clearing opens to the sky and allows Apollo's light to reach the forest floor unfiltered. Here grows the most sacred tree in your domain, an enormous laurel that has stood for longer than human memory. Its trunk is so wide that it would take dozens of mortals holding hands to encircle it, and its crown reaches so high that its topmost branches seem to tickle the belly of passing clouds. This tree is more than just vegetation. It is a living monument, a testament to the moment when the god Apollo first claimed this forest as his sanctuary. The story of the laurel is one that you know by heart, having been present when it unfolded centuries ago. It began with Daphne, a nymph much like yourself, whose beauty caught the attention of the golden god. But Daphne had pledged herself to Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, choosing the hunt and the freedom of the wilderness over the bonds of love and marriage. When Apollo, struck by one of Eris's arrows, pursued her with all the passion of divine infatuation, Daphne fled through these very woods. You can still remember the sound of her desperate flight, branches breaking, leaves rustling in panic, her breathing harsh with exertion and fear. The chase led to the banks of a sacred spring, where Daphne, seeing no other escape, called upon the earth itself to save her from Apollo's unwanted advances. Her prayer was answered in the most dramatic and final way possible. Her feet rooted to the ground, her arms stretched skyward and transformed into branches, her skin hardening into bark, her hair becoming the eternal green leaves of the laurel tree. Apollo arrived just in time to see the transformation complete itself, to place his hands against the bark and feel the familiar heartbeat of the one he had loved still pulsing within the wood. The great laurel that dominates your grove is not that original tree. Daphne's transformed body stands in a different grove, on the banks of a different spring. But Apollo, in his grief and his reverence, planted laurel groves throughout his domain, each one a living memorial to the nymph who chose transformation over submission. Your laurel is one of these monuments, and its presence sanctifies the entire forest. Mortals who wear crowns of laurel leaves honor not just Apollo, but also Daphne's sacrifice and the complex relationship between divine desire and mortal autonomy. You approach the great tree now and place your palm against its ancient bark. The wood feels warm beneath your touch, and for just a moment you sense something like an answering consciousness within. Not Daphne herself, but the echo of her story, the memory of her choice preserved in the very fiber of the wood. All laurel trees carry this memory, you've learned. It is what makes them sacred to Apollo, what gives their leaves the power to inspire prophecy and poetry. When mortals chew laurel leaves in hopes of receiving visions, they are consuming, in some small way, the essence of transformation itself. The sun climbs higher, and you begin your daily rounds through the forest. As a nymph, you have responsibilities that go far beyond simply existing in this beautiful place. You are a guardian, a tender of the sacred, a bridge between the divine and natural worlds. Every tree in this grove is under your care, every stream is your charge, every creature that makes its home here is your responsibility. This is not a burden, but a joy. What could be more fulfilling than ensuring that this pocket of paradise remains healthy, vibrant, and worthy of the God who has claimed it as his own? Your first stop is always the Circle of Seven Springs, a natural wonder that lies at the geographic heart of the forest. Here, 7 natural springs bubble up from deep underground, their waters forming a rough circle perhaps 30 paces across. Each spring has its own character, its own mineral content, its own temperature, its own personality. The spring of inspiration flows crystal clear and slightly warm, its waters said to enhance the creative abilities of anyone who drinks from it. The spring of healing runs cold and tastes faintly of mint, capable of curing ailments both physical and spiritual. The spring of prophecy bubbles up in unpredictable spurts, its water cloudy with sediment that swirls in patterns that sometimes reveal glimpses of future events. The remaining 4 springs, memory, dreams, truth, and harmony, each contribute their own unique properties to the sacred circle. Together, they create a pool where all 7 streams mingle, their individual essences combining into something greater than the sum of their parts. This central pool is perhaps the most sacred spot in the entire grove, for it is here that Apollo himself sometimes comes to bathe, to refresh his divine essence, to reconnect with the natural forces that are part of his domain. You kneel at the edge of the central pool and cup some of its water in your hands, bringing it to your lips for your morning drink. The taste is indescribable. Imagine if liquid sunlight had a flavor, if the essence of a perfect spring morning could be distilled into a single sip. The water nourishes you in ways that food nourishes mortals, providing not just hydration but also spiritual sustenance, connection to the divine, and renewal of your own supernatural essence. As the sacred water flows through your ethereal form, you feel your connection to the forest deepen and strengthen. While you drink, you perform one of your most important daily duties, checking the purity of each spring. This is not just a matter of ensuring that the water runs clear and clean, though that is certainly part of it. You must also monitor the spiritual health of each spring, making sure that their divine properties remain intact and that no malevolent influence has contaminated their sacred essence. It is delicate work that requires all of your supernatural senses. You dip your fingers into each spring in turn, tasting not just with your tongue but with your entire being, feeling for any discord, any disruption, any sign that the balance has been disturbed. Today, all is well. The spring of inspiration bubbles with its characteristic enthusiasm, practically effervescent with creative potential. The spring of healing flows with its usual steady, soothing rhythm, its waters carrying the faint but unmistakable sensation of cellular regeneration and spiritual renewal. The spring of prophecy gurgles mysteriously, its cloudy waters swirling in patterns that you don't attempt to interpret. That is Apollo's gift, not yours, though you can sense the weight of future knowledge contained within its depths. Honestly, if you had to choose just one spot in all the sacred groves of Greece, which would capture your heart most completely? For me, it has to be this Circle of 7 Springs. The way each individual source maintains its own identity while contributing to something greater, it's a perfect metaphor for how the gods and nature work together. After checking the springs, you follow the network of streams that carry their overflow deeper into the forest. These waterways serve as the circulatory system of the grove, distributing not just physical water, but also the various spiritual essences contained within each spring. Where the stream of inspiration flows, the trees grow taller and their branches reach toward the sky with particular enthusiasm. Where the stream of healing passes, you notice that injured animals tend to congregate, instinctively drawn to waters that can ease their pain and accelerate their recovery. Following the stream of dreams leads you to one of your favorite sections of the forest, a grove within the grove where the very air seems thick with possibility and imagination. The trees here grow in impossible configurations, their trunks twisted into spirals, their branches forming perfect geometric patterns, their leaves shimmering with colors that exist nowhere else in nature. This is where mortals experience visions when they sleep beneath Apollo's protection, where prophets come to receive their most vivid revelations, where artists discover inspiration for works that will outlast empires. You pause here to check on the dream moss, a peculiar plant that grows only in places where the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes thin. The moss appears to be ordinary enough during daylight hours, a simple carpet of green covering the bases of the twisted trees. But as evening approaches and shadows lengthen, the moss begins to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light that pulses in rhythm with the breathing of sleeping creatures. Mortals who lie upon dream moss while slumbering are guaranteed to experience dreams of unusual vividness and meaning. Some report prophetic visions, others find solutions to problems that have long plagued them, and still others receive artistic inspiration that transforms their creative work. The dream moss requires special care to maintain its supernatural properties. Too much direct sunlight can cause it to lose its luminescent qualities, while too little light can make it fade away entirely. You must ensure that the canopy above provides exactly the right balance of light and shadow throughout the day. This involves gentle persuasion of the trees themselves, encouraging certain branches to grow in directions that will create optimal shade patterns, coaxing leaves to cluster in arrangements that filter the sunlight just so. It is delicate work that requires patience, intuition, and a deep understanding of how plants respond to both physical and spiritual influences. As you tend to the dream moss, you become aware of a familiar presence approaching through the forest. The very air seems to brighten, and the quality of light filtering through the leaves takes on a more golden hue. Birds that were singing softly begin to trill with greater enthusiasm, and flowers that had been merely beautiful suddenly seem to glow with their own inner radiance. This can only mean one thing: Apollo himself is nearby. You feel your pulse quicken with anticipation. Despite the centuries you have spent in his sacred grove, despite the countless times you have been in the god's presence, you never quite get used to the sheer magnitude of divine charisma that surrounds him. Apollo doesn't just enter a space, he transforms it, elevates it, makes it more than it was before. Colors become more vivid, sounds more harmonious, scents more intoxicating. Even the air itself seems to vibrate with creative potential when the god of music and poetry draws near. You turn toward the approaching presence and see him emerging from between the trees like a figure from a mortal's most sublime dream. Apollo appears as he often does in his forest domain. Neither the blazing sun god who drives his chariot across the sky, nor the formal deity who presides over oracular ceremonies at Delphi, but as the young, vital embodiment of natural beauty and artistic inspiration. His hair catches the dappled sunlight and seems to hold it, creating a subtle nimbus around his perfectly proportioned features. His skin has the healthy glow of someone who spends his time outdoors, though no tan lines mar his divine perfection. He moves through the forest with the easy confidence of someone who belongs here completely, someone for whom every leaf and branch and stone exists in perfect harmony. Today he carries his lyre, the instrument that can make trees dance and stones weep with its melodies. The lyre itself is a work of art beyond anything mortal craftsmen could create. Its frame carved from wood that came from the very first laurel tree, its strings spun from divine light and enchanted silver. Even when not being played, the instrument seems to hum softly with barely contained music, as if melodies are constantly being born within its frame and released into the world in gentle, unconscious breaths. "Good morning, my dear guardian," Apollo says, and his voice is like honey poured over warm stones, rich and golden and impossibly smooth. Just the sound of it makes the forest around you seem to lean in slightly, as if every tree and flower wants to hear what the god might say next. I trust the grove is well under your care? You incline your head respectfully, though Apollo has never insisted on the formal protocols that some of the other Olympians demand from their followers. The springs run clear and pure, my lord, the dream moss thrives, and the sacred trees grow strong. All is as it should be in your domain. Apollo nods, though you can see that he is already aware of the forest's condition. Gods, especially gods as perceptive as Apollo, don't need to ask questions to know what is happening in their realms. His inquiry was more courtesy than necessity, an acknowledgement of your role as caretaker and your right to report on the state of your charges. Walk with me, Apollo says, and it is both request and gentle command. You fall into step beside him as he follows one of the forest paths deeper into the grove. His presence makes everything around you more intense, more significant. Flowers that were already beautiful become breathtaking. Bird songs that were already lovely transform into complex harmonies that seem composed by an invisible maestro. The very air sparkles with creative energy that makes your skin tingle and your thoughts feel sharper, clearer, more focused. As you walk, Apollo tells you about his recent travels to other parts of his domain. He speaks of a fishing village on a distant island where a young girl has begun receiving prophetic dreams, her visions so clear and accurate that sailors now seek her out before embarking on dangerous voyages. He describes a city where a street musician has discovered a new way of tuning his instrument that creates harmonies no one has heard before, melodies that seem to heal old wounds and mend broken hearts. He mentions a grove of olive trees where the fruit has been growing larger and sweeter than ever before, apparently in response to a shepherd who was taken to singing ancient hymns while his flock grazes beneath their branches. These stories fascinate you because they illustrate how Apollo's influence ripples out into the mortal world in unexpected ways. The god's domain is not limited to a few scattered temples and sacred groves. Instead, his power touches every act of artistic creation, every moment of healing, every flash of prophetic insight, every instance where light overcomes darkness or harmony emerges from chaos. He is present in ways both grand and subtle, both obvious and hidden, both immediate and long-lasting. Your walk takes you to the Grove of Ancient Songs, a section of the forest where the trees themselves have been shaped by centuries of divine music. Here, Apollo has performed some of his greatest compositions, and the very wood has absorbed the essence of those melodies. The trunks grow in rhythmic patterns that mirror musical scales, their bark marked with spiraling ridges that follow the mathematical relationships underlying perfect harmony. When the wind blows through these trees, the sound they make is not just rustling leaves, but actual music, wordless songs that can move listeners to tears or fill them with inexplicable joy. Apollo raises his lyre and begins to play, and you feel your entire being resonate with the divine music. The melody starts simple, almost tentative, like a question being posed to the universe. But it quickly grows in complexity and power, weaving together themes that represent the changing seasons, the cycle of growth and decay and rebirth, the eternal dance between light and shadow that defines existence itself. The music seems to come not just from the lyre, but from everything around you. The trees sway in rhythm, birds add their voices to the harmony, even the wind seems to modulate its voice to complement the divine composition. As Apollo plays, you notice that the forest is responding in visible ways to the music. Flowers bloom more fully, their colors becoming more saturated and vibrant. Bees buzz in patterns that echo the melodic line, creating a counterpoint harmony that weaves in and out of the main theme. A family of deer steps into the grove and stands motionless, their eyes wide with wonder, completely captured by the beauty of the divine performance. But perhaps the most remarkable response comes from the trees themselves. As the music swells and develops, you can see the wood literally growing, branches extending themselves in graceful arcs, leaves unfurling with perfect timing to match the rhythm of the composition. It's as if the trees are dancing in extremely slow motion, their movements synchronized to the divine melody in a way that mortal eyes could never detect, but that your supernatural senses perceive with crystal clarity. When the song reaches its climax, the entire grove seems to pulse with shared ecstasy. Every living thing participates in this moment of perfect harmony, from the smallest insect to the mightiest oak. You feel tears running down your cheeks, though you couldn't say whether they're born of joy or sadness or simply the overwhelming beauty of the experience. This is what it means to be in the presence of pure divinity, to witness creation itself being renewed and celebrated through the power of perfect art. The music gradually fades, but its effects linger in the air like the scent of a rare flower. The trees continue to sway gently even though the wind has died down. Birds continue to sing in the harmonious patterns they learned from the divine melody. The very quality of light in the grove seems somehow improved, more golden and warm and life-giving than before. Music, Apollo says, lowering his lyre, is the language of creation itself. When we create true art, we participate in the same divine force that brought order out of chaos, that separated light from darkness, that gave form to the formless void. This is why I guard it so carefully, why I punish those who would corrupt or diminish its power. Art is not mere entertainment, it is one of the fundamental forces of existence. You nod, understanding this truth in your bones. As a nymph, you are yourself a part of the creative force that shapes the natural world. Every flower that blooms in your footsteps, every tree that grows straighter and taller under your care, every stream that runs clearer and sweeter because of your attention, all of these are acts of creation, small participations in the divine work of bringing beauty into existence. Apollo continues your walk, leading you toward another of your daily responsibilities, the sacred grove of memory. This is where mortals sometimes come to leave offerings and seek help in preserving important memories or recovering ones that have been lost. The trees here are different from those in other parts of the forest. Their bark is smooth and silver-grey, almost metallic in appearance, and their leaves rustle with a sound like whispered secrets even when there is no wind. The grove of memory requires different care than other sections of the forest. Here, your job is not to encourage growth so much as to maintain stability and permanence. These trees must remain exactly as they are, unchanging anchors in the flow of time, reliable repositories for the memories entrusted to their keeping. You check each tree carefully, running your hands along their smooth bark, listening for any sign of instability or decay. A tree that begins to sicken in the grove of memory can mean the loss of countless irreplaceable memories, love stories and family histories, the final words of dying parents, the first steps of beloved children, moments of triumph and tragedy that define individual human lives. Today, you detect a slight weakness in one of the smaller trees, a barely perceptible tremor in its life force that suggests some minor damage to its root system. This requires immediate attention, for memories are among the most fragile and precious of all human treasures. You kneel at the base of the troubled tree and place both palms against the earth, extending your consciousness down through the soil to examine the roots more closely. What you find is not disease or injury, but rather simple overcrowding. The tree's roots have become entangled with those of its neighbors, creating competition for nutrients and water. This is easily remedied, but it requires delicate work. Using your supernatural connection to plant life, you gently encourage some roots to grow in different directions, easing the competition and allowing each tree to claim its own territory underground. It's like untying a knot made of living wood, requiring patience and careful attention to avoid damaging the very things you're trying to help. While you work, Apollo observes with interest. You have a gift for this work, he says. Not all nymphs possess such sensitivity to the needs of growing things. Have you ever considered expanding your domain beyond this single grove? The suggestion surprises you. You've grown so accustomed to thinking of yourself as guardian of this particular forest that you've never seriously considered the possibility of tending to other sacred sites. But Apollo's words make you realize that your skills might indeed be applicable in other places, other contexts. "Where would you have me go, my lord?" you ask, still concentrating on the delicate root work beneath your hands. "There are other groves, other sacred spaces that could benefit from your touch," Apollo replies. "A healing sanctuary in the mountains where the herbs grow wild and untended. A prophetic grove near the sea where the laurel trees have grown old and require renewal. A meditation garden where mortals come to seek wisdom but find only neglect and overgrowth." The idea intrigues you, though it also makes you feel slightly anxious. This grove has been your entire world for centuries. You know every tree, every stream, every rock, every seasonal change in the quality of light. To leave, even temporarily, would mean abandoning responsibilities you've never left unattended. As if reading your thoughts, Apollo smiles. "You needn't decide immediately, but consider this. A garden that never shares its seeds produces no new gardens. A nymph whose wisdom remains confined to a single grove cannot fulfill her greatest potential. When you're ready, the opportunity will be waiting." With the root problem resolved, you move on to another daily task: checking the boundaries of the sacred grove. This is more important than it might initially seem, for the forest's supernatural properties depend partly on its separation from the ordinary world. The boundary is not marked by any physical barrier that mortals could see, but rather by subtle shifts in the spiritual atmosphere, places where divine influence gives way to purely natural forces. Walking the perimeter of Apollo's domain, you can feel the boundary as a gentle but distinct change in the air itself. Inside the grove, everything vibrates with divine energy. Colours are more vivid, sounds more musical, scents more intoxicating, and the very air seems charged with creative potential. Cross the invisible line into ordinary forest, and all of these qualities fade to more mundane levels. It's not that the outside world is unpleasant or ugly, merely that it lacks the supernatural enhancement that Apollo's presence brings to his chosen spaces. Your job is to ensure that this boundary remains intact and properly positioned. Sometimes natural forces, storms, floods, fires, can disrupt the spiritual barriers that separate sacred from profane. Sometimes the boundary can drift gradually over time, expanding or contracting based on the strength of the divine presence within. And occasionally, malevolent forces might actively try to breach the sacred space, seeking to corrupt or diminish its power. Today you find the boundaries intact and stable, the divine influence neither expanding aggressively into neighboring areas nor retreating from its properly claimed territory. This is as it should be. Apollo is a god who respects proper limits and proportions. Unlike some of his more chaotic relatives, he doesn't seek to claim more than his rightful share of the world, nor does he allow what is his to be diminished by neglect or inattention. As you complete your circuit of the grove's perimeter, you encounter another of its supernatural inhabitants, a satyr who serves as one of Apollo's companions and messengers. Satyrs are very different from nymphs, though you share a connection to the natural world. Where nymphs embody the gentler, more nurturing aspects of nature, satyrs represent its wilder, more primal energies. This particular satyr, who goes by the name Syrinx, has the legs and hooves of a goat, small horns protruding from his curly hair, and an expression of perpetual mischief dancing in his eyes. "Well met, guardian of the grove," Syrinx says, his voice carrying the hint of barely suppressed laughter that seems characteristic of his kind. "I bring word from the Lord Apollo. He wishes you to know that a delegation of mortal pilgrims will be arriving before sunset, seeking healing for their village's sick children. You're to prepare the sacred springs and gather the medicinal herbs they'll need." This news brings both excitement and responsibility. Mortal visitors to Apollo's grove are relatively rare, the location is remote and difficult to reach, and only those with the most desperate needs typically undertake the arduous journey. When they do come, it's usually for issues that ordinary healing cannot address, ailments that require divine intervention, spiritual maladies that resist conventional treatment, or problems so severe that only the combined power of Apollo's healing springs and sacred herbs offers any hope of cure. Preparing for such visitors requires careful planning and considerable work. The healing herbs don't simply grow wild throughout the forest. They must be cultivated in special conditions, harvested at precise times, and prepared according to ancient protocols that have been refined over centuries of divine practice. Some herbs are most potent when picked at dawn, others at noon, still others during the dark of night. Some must be dried immediately after harvesting, while others must be used fresh. Some require blessing with sacred water from specific springs, while others must be exposed to direct sunlight or moonlight for prescribed periods. You thank Syrinx for the message and immediately begin organizing your afternoon's work. First, you'll need to visit the herb garden of Asclepius, a special section of the grove where Apollo's son, the god of healing, has established a collection of every medicinal plant known to exist. Then you'll need to prepare the healing circle, a sacred space where the actual treatment will take place. Finally, you'll need to ensure that the appropriate springs are flowing at their optimal capacity and that their waters are properly blessed for therapeutic use. The herb garden of Asclepius lies in a natural bowl-shaped depression that receives morning sun, but is sheltered from the harsh light of midday. Here grow plants that exist nowhere else on Earth. Some brought from distant lands by divine messengers, others created through the direct intervention of the gods themselves. There's the tears of Hygeia, a flowering vine whose blossoms can cure any poison if prepared correctly. The golden moss of regeneration grows only on stones that have been blessed by both Apollo and his father Zeus, and it can heal wounds that would otherwise prove fatal. Most precious of all is the tree of renewed youth, whose fruit can extend mortal lifespans and whose bark can restore vitality to the aged and infirm. But for children's illnesses, you'll need different remedies. You select stems from the silver willow of fever breaking, whose powdered bark can reduce even the most dangerous fevers. You harvest leaves from the comfort sage, whose tea can ease the pain and inflammation that accompany childhood diseases. You carefully gather berries from the purple bush of strength restoring, which can help young bodies recover from illnesses that have left them weak and depleted. Each plant requires its own specific harvesting technique. The silver willow must be approached with gratitude and reverence, for it sacrifices part of itself for the healing of others. You place your hands on its trunk and offer a silent prayer of thanks before carefully removing the needed bark with a silver knife blessed by Apollo himself. The comfort sage releases its healing properties most fully when harvested with joy rather than grimness, so you hum a cheerful melody as you select the best leaves, allowing your happiness to infuse the plant material with positive energy. The purple bush of strength. Restoring requires a different approach. Its berries are most potent when gathered in complete silence, with focused concentration and unwavering intent. As you work, you reflect on the relationship between healing and divinity. Mortals often assume that gods cure illnesses through simple divine fiat. A wave of the hand, a spoken word, and disease vanishes like morning mist. The reality is far more complex and, you think, far more beautiful. Divine healing works through natural processes, but elevated and enhanced beyond their ordinary limitations. The herbs you're gathering contain the same healing compounds they would in any forest, but grown in sacred soil, watered by blessed springs, and tended by supernatural hands, their potency increases 100-fold. This is Apollo's way. Not to override the natural order, but to perfect it, to reveal its hidden potential, to show what the world could be if every force worked in harmony toward the highest good. The herbs will heal the children not by magic, but by medicine made so pure and powerful that it approaches the miraculous. The parents will return home not just with cured children, but with a deeper understanding of the relationship between the natural and divine worlds. With the herbs gathered and properly prepared, you turn your attention to the healing circle. This sacred space lies at the confluence of three streams, the stream of healing, naturally, but also the stream of harmony and the stream of peace. The triple intersection creates a natural mandala of flowing water with a circular island at the center just large enough for the healing ceremonies to take place. Preparing the healing circle involves both physical and spiritual labor. The island must be swept clean of fallen leaves and debris, though you're careful to disturb the environment as little as possible. Certain stones must be arranged in specific patterns that channel and focus healing energy. Sacred symbols must be drawn in the sand using water from each of the 3 streams, creating geometric patterns that help align human spiritual centers with divine healing forces. But the most important preparation is entirely internal. You must ready your own spirit to serve as a conduit for Apollo's healing power. This involves meditation, prayer, and a gradual opening of your consciousness to allow divine energy to flow through you. It's not unlike tuning a musical instrument, adjusting your spiritual vibration until it harmonizes perfectly with the healing frequencies that Apollo embodies. As you work, you become aware of a change in the forest's atmosphere. The quality of light shifts subtly, taking on a warmer, more golden hue. Birdsongs become more melodious, and flowers seem to bloom more fully. Even the streams appear to run more clearly, their water sparkling with unusual brilliance. These are all signs that Apollo's healing aspect is manifesting more strongly in preparation for the evening's work. The sun reaches its zenith as you complete the preparations, and you allow yourself a brief rest by the central pool of the Circle of 7 Springs. The water's surface reflects not just your image, but also something deeper, a glimpse of your true nature as a being suspended between the mortal and divine worlds. In the reflection, you can see the forest's energy flowing through you, connecting you to every tree, every flower, every creature within the grove's boundaries. You are not separate from this place. You are an integral part of its existence, as essential to its functioning as the springs themselves. A movement in the forest catches your attention, and you turn to see a family of rabbits emerging from the underbrush to drink at the sacred springs. They move without fear, approaching the water with the confidence of creatures who know they are in a safe place. This is another sign of the grove's perfect health. When wild animals feel comfortable enough to approach the most sacred spaces, it indicates that the balance between divine and natural forces remains undisturbed. As the afternoon progresses, you continue your rounds through the forest, checking on various sacred sites and ensuring that everything remains in perfect order for the evening's visitors. You visit the Grove of Prophecy, where laurel trees grow in spirals that mirror the mathematical relationships underlying divine revelation. You tend to the Garden of Artistic Inspiration, where flowers bloom in patterns that have inspired mortal artists to create works of surpassing beauty. You check the meditation glade, where the quality of silence is so perfect that mortals who sit there often report profound spiritual experiences. Each location requires different care, different attention, different understanding. The Grove of Prophecy needs stillness and clarity. You ensure that no debris blocks the sight lines between the spiral-planted trees, that no insects or small animals might disturb mortals seeking visions. The Garden of Artistic Inspiration thrives on creative energy. You encourage the flowers to bloom in new patterns, to display color combinations that have never been seen before, to create visual symphonies that will spark inspiration in visiting artists. Actually, thinking about all these different groves and their unique purposes, which aspect of Apollo's domain do you find most fascinating? For me, it has to be the way prophecy and artistic inspiration seem to flow from the same divine source. There's something deeply moving about the idea that seeing the future and creating beauty are both expressions of the same fundamental force. As you move through the forest, you gradually become aware that the day is drawing toward its close. The angle of sunlight changes, shadows lengthen, and the entire grove begins to shift into its evening mood. This is traditionally the most magical time in Apollo's forest, when the boundary between day and night creates a liminal space where supernatural events are most likely to occur. You make your way to the main entrance of the grove, following a path that winds through some of the most beautiful sections of the forest. Here, ancient oaks spread their mighty branches in cathedral arches, creating natural hallways carpeted with moss so soft it seems to glow in the fading light. Flowering vines drape themselves between the trees like nature's own tapestries, their blooms releasing fragrances that change and develop throughout the day like a complex perfume. The path itself is not one that mortal eyes could easily follow. It shifts subtly based on the spiritual readiness of those who seek to walk it. For those who come with pure intentions and genuine need, the way is clear and welcoming, with flowers blooming to mark the correct turns and streams providing music to guide their steps. But for those who approach with selfish motives or malicious intent, the path becomes confusing and discouraging, leading in circles until they give up and turn back. As you reach the grove's entrance, you see them approaching through the ordinary forest beyond, a small group of mortals moving slowly and carefully along what must be, for them, a barely visible track through the wilderness. They are clearly exhausted from their long journey, their clothes dusty and torn from passage through rough terrain, their faces drawn with the worry that only parents of sick children can truly understand. The delegation consists of 6 adults, 4 parents and 2 village healers who have exhausted their conventional remedies. They carry bundles on their backs that you know must contain precious offerings for the god, items their village could ill afford to give up, but which they hope will prove their desperation and sincerity. Their faces show the strain of their journey and the weight of their responsibility, but also a flickering hope that grows brighter as they approach the sacred grove. You step forward to greet them, allowing yourself to become visible to mortal eyes. This requires a subtle shift in your spiritual vibration, making your form solid enough to be perceived while maintaining the otherworldly beauty that marks you as a supernatural being. To mortal perception, you appear as a young woman of extraordinary beauty, dressed in simple robes that seem to be woven from sunlight and shadow, with flowers in your hair that remain perpetually fresh and vibrant. "Welcome, pilgrims," you say, and your voice carries undertones of wind in leaves and water over stones. "I am the guardian of this sacred grove. Apollo has heard your need and prepared a place of healing for your children. Follow me, and I will lead you to where hope may be renewed." The mortals' faces light up with relief and gratitude. One of the mothers, a woman whose dark hair is streaked with premature grey from worry, falls to her knees in thanksgiving. "Blessed Nymph," she says, tears streaming down her cheeks, "we have travelled for 7 days and 7 nights to reach this place. Our children lie dying of a fever that no earthly remedy can touch. If there is any help to be found in this world, we know it must be here, in the domain of the healing god." You help the woman to her feet with gentle hands, feeling the weight of mortal desperation and hope that she carries. "Rise, faithful mother. No knee need bend in this place save in reverence to the god himself. Your love for your children has brought you here, and love is its own form of prayer, its own offering to the divine." You lead the group deeper into the grove, following paths that reveal new wonders with each step. The mortals gasp in amazement as flowers bloom in their footsteps, as birds sing in perfect harmony above their heads, as the very air begins to shimmer with healing energy. They have entered a realm where the impossible becomes routine, where the boundary between the natural and supernatural dissolves into something greater than either could be alone. The healing circle appears before you like a vision from a blessed dream. The 3 streams catch the last rays of sunlight and throw it back in spirals of golden light that dance across the water's surface. The island at the center seems to glow with its own inner radiance, and the sacred symbols you drew earlier shimmer as if traced in liquid starlight. This is clearly a place where miracles happen, where divine power touches the mortal world in ways both gentle and profound. "Here," you tell the pilgrims, "you will find what you seek, but first you must understand what true healing requires. It is not simply the removal of symptoms or the restoration of physical health. True healing addresses the whole being, body, mind, and spirit. It requires not just faith in divine power, but also commitment to living in harmony with the natural order." One of the village healers, an elderly man whose hands bear the stains of countless herbal preparations, nods in understanding. "We have seen how sickness often follows when communities lose their connection to the sacred," he says. "Our village has grown proud and forgetful, taking the gifts of earth and sky for granted. Perhaps our children's illness is a reminder that we must return to older wisdom." You smile at his insight. Wisdom indeed. Apollo's healing power flows most freely to those who acknowledge their place within the greater web of existence. Tonight, you will receive the medicine your children need, but you will also receive understanding that will serve your community for generations to come. As the sun sets, Apollo himself appears in the healing circle, his divine radiance illuminating the sacred space with light that seems to come from within rather than without. The mortals fall prostrate before him, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of divinity made manifest. But the god raises them gently, his voice carrying all the warmth of summer sunshine and all the authority of cosmic law. "Rise, faithful servants," Apollo says. "I have heard your prayers carried on the evening wind, tasted your tears in the sacred springs, felt your love in the very stones of my grove. Your children shall be healed, but not by power alone. They will be restored through the proper marriage of divine blessing and natural remedy, of spiritual intervention and parental love." The healing ceremony that follows is unlike anything in mortal experience. Apollo blends the herbs you gathered into preparations that glow with inner light, each mixture specifically tailored to the needs of the individual children waiting back in the village. The sacred waters from the three streams are combined in proportions that create harmonies of healing power, each drop carrying the potential to restore not just health, but vitality and joy. But more than the physical medicines, Apollo grants the pilgrims understanding. He shows them how to read the signs of spiritual imbalance that precede physical illness, how to maintain harmony between their community and the natural world, how to recognize and honor the sacred in their daily lives. The knowledge flows into them not as abstract concepts, but as lived understanding, becoming part of their being in ways that will transform not just their healing practices, but their entire relationship with the world around them. As the night deepens, you find yourself changed by witnessing this intersection of divine power and mortal need. You've always known that your role as guardian of the grove was important, but seeing how your careful tending enables such miracles gives you a deeper appreciation for the significance of your work. Every flower you've helped bloom, every stream you've kept pure, every tree you've nurtured to health, all of it contributes to moments like this, when divine healing touches mortal lives in ways that ripple outward through time and space. The pilgrims depart before dawn, carrying with them not just the medicines their children need, but also renewed understanding of their place in the cosmic order. You watch them disappear into the ordinary forest beyond the grove's boundaries, knowing that they carry part of the sacred with them, that their village will never be quite the same as a result of this night's encounter with divinity. As the first rays of new sunlight penetrate the forest canopy, you realize that you've experienced the complete cycle of your existence as guardian of Apollo's grove. The quiet tending of daily responsibilities, the preparation for divine intervention, the miracle of healing itself, and now the peaceful return to contemplation and renewal. This rhythm has defined your existence for centuries, and you suspect it will continue for centuries more. But Apollo's words about expanding your domain linger in your mind. Perhaps there are other groves, other sacred spaces that could benefit from the wisdom you've gained through long years of faithful service. Perhaps your role in the cosmic order is larger than you've imagined, encompassing not just this single forest, but a network of sacred places that span the mortal world. As you begin another day of tending the grove, you carry with you a new sense of possibility, a growing awareness that your calling as a nymph might extend far beyond the familiar boundaries of Apollo's forest. The sunrise paints the canopy in shades of gold and green that seem to pulse with promise, and the morning breeze carries whispers of adventures yet to come. But for now, there are springs to check, herbs to tend, and sacred spaces to maintain. The work of a forest guardian is never truly finished, and there is deep satisfaction in knowing that your efforts create a pocket of paradise where the divine and natural worlds exist in perfect harmony. In serving Apollo's domain, you serve the greater good of existence itself, helping to maintain the balance that keeps the cosmos functioning in all its magnificent complexity. The day stretches before you, filled with familiar tasks and eternal purpose, and you step forward into it with the grace and confidence that comes from knowing your place in the grand design of all things. You are a nymph of Apollo's forest, guardian of sacred spaces, bridge between mortal and divine, and there is no calling more noble or necessary in all the wide world. Later in the morning, as you tend to a grove of young olive trees that Apollo planted to honor his sister Artemis, you notice signs of an approaching storm. The air pressure changes in ways that mortal senses couldn't detect, and the forest's smaller creatures begin seeking shelter with the instinctive wisdom of those who live in constant harmony with natural forces. You can smell rain in the air long before the first clouds appear, a fresh, charged scent that speaks of lightning and wind and the violent beauty of nature unleashing its power. Storms require special attention in a sacred grove. While you cannot control the weather, that falls under Zeus's domain rather than Apollo's, you can prepare the forest to weather the tempest with minimal damage. Young trees need to be staked and supported, vulnerable flowers must be given shelter, and the sacred springs require protection from debris that heavy rains might wash into their pure waters. You begin by visiting the grove's newest residents, a cluster of laurel saplings that Apollo planted just last season. These young trees are particularly dear to the god's heart, representing both the renewal of his domain and the eternal memory of Daphne's transformation. They're still too small to withstand severe weather on their own, so you carefully stake each one with supports made from fallen branches of their parent trees. There's something poetic about this practice, the older generation literally holding up the younger, ensuring the continuity of the sacred grove through whatever storms might come. As you work, you find yourself thinking about the cyclical nature of forest life. Birth, growth, maturity, death, decay, and rebirth. The eternal wheel that turns regardless of divine intervention or supernatural care. Even in a sacred grove blessed by the gods, these fundamental patterns continue. Trees live their centuries and eventually return to the soil. Flowers bloom and fade with the seasons. Animals are born, live their lives, and pass away to make room for new generations. Your role as guardian doesn't exempt you from this cycle, but it does give you a different relationship to it. Where mortals might see death and decay as tragic endings, you perceive them as necessary transformations, essential parts of the greater pattern that keeps life flowing and renewing itself. When ancient trees finally fall, their trunks become nurse logs that nourish new growth. When flowers fade, their seeds ensure the continuation of their species. Even in death, the forest continues its work of creation. The approaching storm represents another aspect of this eternal cycle, the violence and chaos that periodically sweep through natural systems, clearing away the weak and overgrown, making space for fresh possibilities. While you work to minimize damage where possible, you also understand that some disruption is necessary for long-term health. A forest that never experiences storms becomes stagnant and vulnerable to diseases that proper stress might have prevented. As the first drops of rain begin to fall, you hurry to complete your preparations. The more delicate flowers must be covered with protective shields made from broad leaves arranged in ways that allow air circulation while deflecting the heaviest precipitation. The sacred springs need temporary barriers to keep storm debris from contaminating their pure waters. Most importantly, the various ceremonial spaces require clearing of any loose objects that high winds might turn into dangerous projectiles. By the time the storm hits in earnest, you've done everything possible to prepare the grove for its arrival. Now comes the more challenging task of maintaining the spiritual integrity of the sacred space while natural forces rage around you. Storms can disrupt more than just physical structures. The chaotic energies they bring can interfere with the harmonious spiritual atmosphere that makes a sacred grove different from ordinary forest. You take your position at the heart of the grove, near the circle of 7 springs, where the spiritual power of the place runs strongest. Here, you must serve as a kind of spiritual anchor, holding steady against the storm's disrupting influence while channeling Apollo's divine energy to maintain the grove's supernatural properties. It's exhausting work that requires every ounce of your concentration and will. The storm proves to be a fierce one. Lightning illuminates the forest in brilliant stroboscopic flashes, followed by thunder that shakes the ground beneath your feet. Rain falls in torrents that turn the smallest streams into temporary rivers, and wind howls through the canopy with a voice like 1,000 angry spirits. Trees bend and sway in ways that seem impossible, their flexibility the only thing saving them from being uprooted entirely. Through it all, you maintain your focus on preserving the grove's sacred nature. You can feel the storm's chaotic energy pressing against the boundaries of divine order, seeking to reduce this special place to merely another patch of wilderness. It's a battle fought entirely on spiritual planes, invisible to mortal eyes but vital to the grove's continued function as a sanctuary where gods and mortals can meet. Actually, when you think about the various challenges that test a sacred grove, which do you find most threatening? For me, it has to be spiritual corruption, the gradual contamination that comes when sacred spaces are treated with disrespect or neglect. Physical storms pass, but spiritual damage can linger for centuries. The storm reaches its peak around midnight, and for several terrifying minutes you wonder if your strength will be sufficient to hold the grove's integrity together. The chaotic forces seem overwhelming, pressing in from all sides with an intensity that threatens to shatter your concentration. But then, just as you feel your resistance beginning to waver, you sense another presence joining your efforts. Apollo himself manifests beside you, not in his physical form, but as pure divine will focused on protecting his domain. His power flows through you and around you, amplifying your own abilities 100-fold. Together you weather the worst of the storm's spiritual assault, maintaining the sacred boundaries that define the grove as something more than ordinary forest. The physical storm passes within a few hours, but your spiritual work continues until dawn. Only when the first rays of sunlight penetrate the clouds do you feel it's safe to relax your vigil. The grove has survived, its sacred nature intact despite the violence that swept through it. The springs run as pure as ever, the ceremonial spaces retain their power to inspire and heal, and the overall atmosphere of divine presence remains undisturbed. But the storm has left its mark in purely physical ways. Several large branches have fallen, creating temporary dams in some of the streams. Flowers and herbs you spent months cultivating have been damaged or destroyed. The careful arrangements of stones in various sacred circles have been disturbed by wind and rain. Most seriously, one of the older oak trees, not quite ancient enough to be truly sacred, but still an important part of the grove's character, has been struck by lightning and split nearly in half. The post-storm cleanup presents both challenges and opportunities. The fallen branches must be removed from waterways, but they can be repurposed as supports for new plantings or carved into ceremonial objects. The damaged flowers and herbs can be harvested for their remaining useful properties, even if they're no longer suitable for the most sacred purposes. The disturbed stone circles provide an excuse to redesign some of the ceremonial spaces, potentially improving their function. But the lightning-struck oak requires more careful consideration. In ordinary circumstances, a severely damaged tree would simply be removed to make room for new growth. But in a sacred grove, every tree has accumulated spiritual significance over the years of its growth. This particular oak had served as a gathering place for some of the forest's smaller creatures, and its broad canopy had provided shade for several important medicinal herbs. Its loss would create a gap in both the physical and spiritual landscape of the grove. You examine the damaged tree carefully, running your hands along its bark and extending your consciousness into its wounded wood. What you find surprises you. Despite the dramatic appearance of the lightning strike, the tree's life force remains strong. The split trunk looks devastating from the outside, but the root system remains healthy and the flow of nutrients continues through undamaged sections of the wood. With careful tending, this oak might not only survive, but actually become more interesting and beautiful than before. Lightning-struck trees that survive their wounds often develop unusual growth patterns as they adapt to their changed circumstances. Their wood becomes harder and more durable, their grain develops unique characteristics, and they sometimes produce particularly potent medicines in response to the stress of their injury. You decide to attempt a healing rather than removal. This involves both practical and supernatural interventions. The physical wounds must be cleaned and protected to prevent infection and insect damage. The spiritual trauma must be addressed through ceremonies that help the tree integrate its violent experience into its ongoing growth pattern. Most importantly, the tree's connection to the grove's overall energy network must be carefully maintained and strengthened. Over the following days, you spend hours working with the wounded oak. You clean debris from the lightning strike, seal exposed wood with resin from other trees, and provide extra water and nutrients to support the healing process. But the spiritual work proves more complex and demanding. The tree has been traumatized in ways that go beyond mere physical damage. It carries the memory of violent energy, the shock of sudden transformation, the fear of dissolution. Healing this deeper wound requires patient counseling, if such a term can be applied to communication with a tree. You sit with the oak for hours at a time, extending your consciousness into its awareness, sharing your own strength and stability, while encouraging it to embrace rather than resist the changes forced upon it. Gradually, you help the tree understand that it hasn't been destroyed but transformed, that its lightning scars are marks of survival rather than failure. As the oak begins to heal, both physically and spiritually, you notice changes in the surrounding area. Other plants seem drawn to the tree's new energy, growing more vibrantly in its vicinity. Birds that had avoided the area since the lightning strike begin returning, and some build nests in the unusual cavities created by the split trunk. Most remarkably, a new spring begins to bubble up near the tree's base, its water carrying mineral traces that suggest deep connections to underground sources you hadn't known existed. This experience teaches you something important about the relationship between destruction and creation in sacred spaces. What initially appears as damage or loss often proves to be opportunity for transformation and growth. The lightning strike that seemed so threatening to the grove's beauty and integrity has actually opened new possibilities, created new focal points for spiritual energy, and deepened your understanding of how divine forces work through natural processes. As summer advances toward autumn, you find yourself paying special attention to the seasonal transitions within the grove. Each change of season brings its own challenges and opportunities for a guardian nymph. Spring requires careful nurturing of new growth and protection of vulnerable young plants. Summer demands constant attention to water resources and vigilance against the threats of drought and fire. Autumn calls for preparation of the forest to survive winter's challenges while harvesting and preserving the season's gifts. Winter itself becomes a time of rest and contemplation, but also of planning for the renewal that will come with spring's return. The approaching autumn fills you with both melancholy and anticipation. There's sadness in watching the year's growth cycle draw toward its close, seeing flowers fade and trees begin their preparation for dormancy. But there's also excitement about the unique beauties that autumn brings. The brilliant colors of changing leaves, the crisp clarity of cool air, the rich harvests of nuts and fruits that will sustain forest creatures through the lean months ahead. Your role as guardian shifts with the seasons as well. Autumn tasks include collecting and storing seeds from the grove's most important plants, ensuring genetic diversity for future plantings. You must identify which trees and shrubs might need extra protection during winter storms and begin the process of gradually reducing water and nutrients to help plants prepare for dormancy. Most importantly, you must work with the changing light patterns as days grow shorter, adjusting the grove's spiritual rhythms to maintain harmony with the larger cosmic cycles. One of your favorite autumn responsibilities involves working with the deciduous trees to orchestrate their changing colors. While the basic process of leaf color change follows natural biochemical patterns, in a sacred grove, those patterns can be influenced and enhanced through careful spiritual intervention. By subtly adjusting the flow of energy through individual trees, you can create more vibrant colors, more dramatic contrasts, and more harmonious overall compositions. This year, you decide to attempt something particularly ambitious, a coordinated color display that will tell the story of Apollo's journey across the sky throughout the day. Trees positioned to catch the morning light will display the warm golds and bright yellows associated with dawn. Those in areas illuminated by midday sun will show the deep oranges and brilliant reds of solar noon. Trees that receive primarily afternoon and evening light will display the rich purples and deep crimsons of sunset. Creating such a display requires months of preparation and incredibly precise timing. You must work with each tree individually, understanding its particular characteristics and needs, while also coordinating your efforts to create a coherent overall effect. Some trees naturally tend toward particular colors and can be encouraged in their preferences. Others must be gently coaxed away from their usual patterns toward hues that better serve the artistic vision. The work is exhausting but deeply satisfying. Each day brings subtle changes as the trees respond to your influence and begin their transformation. Gradually, the grove becomes a living canvas depicting the daily journey of the sun god across the heavens. Visitors to the forest, both mortal and divine, often stop in amazement at the beauty of the display, unaware of the careful planning and patient work that made it possible. As autumn deepens, you receive an unexpected visitor. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister and goddess of the hunt, appears in your grove one crisp morning when the air sparkles with frost and the changing leaves glow like stained glass in the early sunlight. She moves through the forest with the silent grace of a master hunter, her presence announced not by sound, but by the subtle changes in animal behavior that mark the arrival of their patron goddess. Unlike her brother's golden radiance, Artemis carries the silver light of moon and stars. Her beauty is cooler, more distant, but no less compelling than Apollo's warmth. She wears practical hunting garb rather than flowing robes, and her dark hair is bound back in a simple style that won't interfere with drawing a bowstring. A quiver of silver arrows rests at her shoulder, and her famous hunting bow, carved from a single piece of golden wood and strung with moonbeams, hangs casually at her side. "Guardian of my brother's grove," Artemis says, her voice carrying the crisp clarity of mountain air and winter streams, "I come seeking counsel on a matter that touches both our domains." You bow respectfully, honored by the visit, but also curious about what could bring the goddess of wild places into a cultivated sacred grove. Artemis and Apollo share many qualities. Both are associated with archery, both have connections to healing, both serve as protectors of the young, but their approaches to these shared responsibilities differ significantly. Where Apollo brings harmony and civilization to his sacred spaces, Artemis preserves wildness and natural law. "I am honored by your presence, great goddess," you reply. "How may this humble nymph serve the needs of the silver-bowed huntress?" Artemis smiles at your formal courtesy, though her expression remains serious. "There is a forest 3 days' journey to the north, wild woodland that has been sacred to me for centuries. Recently, mortal settlements have begun encroaching on its borders. Trees are being cut, streams diverted for irrigation, animals driven away by the noise and disturbance of human activity." You nod, understanding the problem immediately. The tension between growing human populations and remaining wild spaces is an ancient one, predating even the current generation of Olympian gods. Mortals need resources to support their communities, but taking too much too quickly can destroy the very systems that make those resources available in the first place. Normally, Artemis continues, I would simply drive the intruders away through fear or force. A few mysterious accidents, some hunters who return home with tales of supernatural warnings, and most humans get the message quickly enough. But this situation is complicated by the fact that the mortals' need is genuine. Their old farming areas have been devastated by drought, and without new sources of food and water, their children will starve. This is indeed a complex problem, the kind that requires wisdom rather than simple power to resolve. Artemis possesses virtually unlimited ability to protect her wild spaces through force, but such methods would only create temporary solutions while potentially causing humanitarian disasters among the mortal populations. Have you considered creating a controlled partnership, you suggest? Allow limited, sustainable harvesting in certain areas while maintaining the forest's core wilderness intact? Teach the mortals proper forest management techniques that would let them meet their needs without destroying the ecosystem they depend upon? Artemis considers this thoughtfully. The idea has merit, but implementing such a plan would require someone with experience in both divine forest management and mortal psychology. Someone who understands how to balance sacred preservation with practical necessity. Someone like you. The suggestion takes you completely by surprise. Leave Apollo's grove to work in another goddess's domain? The idea seems both thrilling and terrifying. You spent centuries learning every detail of this particular forest, developing intimate relationships with its every tree and stream and stone. Starting over in a new place, especially one that presents such complex challenges, would be the adventure of a lifetime or a recipe for disaster. I'm not certain I'm qualified for such a task, great goddess, you say hesitantly. My experience has been entirely within cultivated sacred spaces. Wild forest management might require different skills entirely. Perhaps, Artemis agrees, but the principles underlying both approaches are similar. Maintaining balance, preserving essential functions, adapting to changing circumstances. More importantly, you have something most forest guardians lack. You understand mortals. You've seen how they think, what motivates them, what they're capable of learning. That understanding would be invaluable in creating a sustainable relationship between my wild spaces and their practical needs. As if summoned by your conversation, Apollo himself appears in the grove, his golden presence providing a warm counterpoint to his sister's silver radiance. The twins share a look that contains volumes of unspoken communication. They've clearly discussed this proposal before your conversation began. The choice is yours, faithful guardian, Apollo says, his voice carrying both understanding and encouragement. I would be sorry to lose your services in this grove, but I would also be proud to see your skills applied to such an important problem. And this wouldn't necessarily be a permanent departure. Think of it as an extended learning opportunity. A chance to expand your abilities by working in a different kind of sacred space. The offer represents everything you've been unconsciously craving: challenge, growth, the opportunity to apply your accumulated wisdom in new ways. But it also means leaving behind everything familiar and secure, venturing into unknown territory where your established expertise might not be sufficient. Looking around the grove you've tended for so long, you realize that your careful stewardship has made it largely self-sustaining. The springs run clear and pure, the sacred trees have grown strong and healthy, the ceremonial spaces maintain their power almost without conscious intervention on your part. Perhaps this is what success really means for a guardian, creating systems so robust and well-balanced that they can function independently, freeing you to take on new challenges. When would you need me to begin, you ask, and both deities smile at your implicit acceptance of the assignment. The situation grows more urgent with each passing day, Artemis admits, but I understand you'll need time to prepare this grove for your absence and to ready yourself for very different challenges. Shall we say 1 month from today? That should give you time to establish temporary caretaking arrangements while allowing me to begin preparing the mortals for a different kind of solution to their problems. And so your immediate future is decided. 1 month to complete your seasonal preparations for winter, to ensure that Apollo's Grove will thrive in your absence, and to ready yourself for the greatest challenge of your long existence as a forest guardian. The prospect fills you with nervous energy. Excitement and anxiety mixed together in proportions that change from moment to moment. Over the following weeks, you throw yourself into preparations with an intensity that surprises even you. Every task takes on extra significance when you consider that it might be months before you can personally attend to these details again. You catalogue the exact conditions of every sacred spring, document the specific care requirements of rare plants, and create detailed maps of seasonal changes in the grove's spiritual energy patterns. But perhaps most importantly, you work to identify other forest spirits who might be willing to share caretaking duties during your absence. This proves more challenging than expected. Most supernatural beings are highly territorial and reluctant to take responsibility for spaces they don't already know intimately. Eventually, you arrange a collaborative solution involving several different types of forest spirits, each contributing their particular expertise to maintaining overall grove health. A family of tree spirits will monitor the health and growth of the sacred trees, ensuring that they receive proper nutrients and protection from disease or injury. A group of water nymphs from a neighboring stream system agree to check on the springs regularly, maintaining their purity and proper flow rates. Several flower fairies volunteer to tend the more delicate plant communities that require daily attention. Most importantly, an ancient oak dryad, one of the oldest and wisest spirits in the region, consents to serve as overall coordinator, ensuring that all the various caretaking efforts work together harmoniously. These arrangements require extensive negotiations and careful coordination of personalities that don't always mesh smoothly. Tree spirits tend to work slowly and methodically, while flower fairies prefer quick bursts of intense activity followed by long periods of rest. Water nymphs focus almost exclusively on aquatic systems and sometimes overlook the needs of terrestrial plants. Bringing all these different approaches together into a coherent caretaking plan takes patience and diplomatic skill that you hadn't known you possessed. As your departure date approaches, you find yourself torn between eagerness for new challenges and sadness at leaving a place that has been your entire world for so long. Every sunrise seems more precious when you consider that you won't witness them from this familiar perspective for an unknown period. Every evening's chorus of bird songs carries extra poignancy when you realize how much you'll miss these particular voices and their unique harmonies. On your final evening in the grove, Apollo appears for what amounts to a farewell ceremony. He brings his lyre and performs a composition he's created specifically for the occasion. A musical portrait of your centuries of faithful service, your growth from a young nymph still learning her responsibilities to a mature guardian, capable of taking on the most complex challenges. The melody captures all the seasons you've witnessed, all the storms you've weathered, all the moments of perfect beauty you've helped create and preserve. As the music fades, Apollo speaks words that will stay with you throughout all your future adventures. You have learned the deepest secret of guardianship, that true care for any place requires the wisdom to know when it's time to let others tend it while you carry your gifts to new ground. The grove will prosper because of what you've built here, and other sacred spaces will benefit from what you've learned. This is how knowledge spreads, how wisdom deepens, how the divine work of maintaining balance in the world continues from generation to generation. The next morning dawns clear and bright, perfect weather for beginning a new chapter of your existence. You take one final tour of the grove, checking on all your favorite spots and saying goodbye to the trees and streams and stones that have been your companions for so long. The lightning-struck oak that you helped heal has developed a distinctive beauty, its split trunk creating interesting patterns of light and shadow, while its roots tap into that unexpected spring that appeared during its recovery. As you reach the grove's boundary, you turn for one last look at the sacred space that shaped you into the guardian you've become. It glows in the morning light like a jewel set in ordinary forest, its beauty and power evident even from this distance. You carry with you not just memories but living connections to this place. threads of spiritual energy that will link you to Apollo's domain, no matter how far your travels might take you. The journey to Artemis's endangered forest takes you through landscapes you've never seen before, opening your awareness to the incredible diversity of sacred and ordinary spaces that make up the natural world. You pass through farmland where mortal agricultural work has created its own kind of beauty, with neat fields and well-tended crops demonstrating human partnership with natural systems. You traverse wild meadows where flowers bloom in chaotic profusion, their beauty unguided by supernatural intervention, but no less stunning for its completely natural origins. Most remarkably, you encounter other sacred groves and forest sanctuaries, each with its own character and purpose. A grove dedicated to Pan echoes with wild music and unrestrained celebration. A sanctuary of Demeter demonstrates the perfect balance between cultivation and natural growth. A forest shrine to Hestia radiates the warmth and security of home, making every visitor feel welcomed and protected. Each of these sacred spaces teaches you something new about the art of guardianship, expanding your understanding of how divine influence can manifest in natural settings. By the time you reach your destination, you carry with you a much broader perspective on the possibilities and challenges of forest stewardship. Artemis's endangered wilderness proves to be even more complex and beautiful than her description suggested. Ancient trees tower overhead, their canopies so thick that the forest floor exists in a perpetual green twilight, broken only by occasional shafts of golden sunlight. Streams run crystal clear over beds of coloured stones, their waters supporting communities of fish and aquatic insects found nowhere else in the region. The air itself pulses with the vital energy of a completely wild ecosystem, untouched by divine cultivation but magnificent in its raw natural power. But you can also see the signs of encroaching human activity. Trees have been marked for cutting along the forest's eastern edge, and primitive roads have been cleared to allow access for logging equipment. Several streams show evidence of diversion upstream, their flow reduced to levels that stress the aquatic ecosystems depending on their waters. Most troubling of all, you detect the subtle but unmistakable signs of spiritual degradation that occur when sacred spaces are treated as mere resources rather than living systems deserving respect and care. Your new challenge is clear. Find ways to meet legitimate human needs while preserving the essential wild character that makes this forest sacred to Artemis. It will require all the skills you've developed as a guardian, plus new abilities you'll have to learn through experience. But as you stand in this ancient woodland, breathing air that tastes of centuries of uninterrupted natural processes, you feel a familiar excitement building in your chest. This is what you've trained for throughout your long existence as a nymph and guardian, the opportunity to serve the divine by caring for the natural world, to bridge the gap between mortal needs and sacred preservation, to help maintain the balance that keeps all of existence functioning in harmony. Your real adventure is just beginning, and you step forward into it with confidence born of centuries of faithful service and the knowledge that you carry with you all the wisdom and strength you'll need to succeed in this vital work. The forest around you hums with potential, waiting for your touch to help it find new ways of thriving while meeting the challenges of a changing world. You are a nymph, a guardian, a bridge between divine and natural realms, and there is no calling more important or fulfilling in all the cosmos. Your story continues, and the best chapters are yet to be written. As you prepare to leave for your new assignment in Artemis's endangered forest, you find yourself contemplating something you rarely think about during the busy routine of daily guardianship: your place within the vast, interconnected community of forest spirits that spans all of Greece and beyond. You are not alone in this work, nor are you unique in your calling. Across the ancient world, thousands of nymphs tend to sacred spaces, each bringing her own gifts and perspectives to the eternal task of maintaining balance between divine and natural realms. The sisterhood of the woods is far more complex and varied than mortals typically understand. When they speak of nymphs at all, humans tend to paint you all with the same brush. beautiful nature spirits who dance in moonlight and seduce unwary travelers. But this simplistic view misses the rich diversity of your kind, the intricate social structures that bind you together, and the specialized roles that different types of nymphs play in the cosmic order. Your own classification as a grove nymph, specifically a guardian of Apollo's domain, places you within one of several major tribes of nature spirits. Each tribe has evolved distinct characteristics, powers, and responsibilities based on their particular connection to different aspects of the natural world. Understanding these distinctions isn't merely academic, it shapes every interaction you have with your supernatural sisters and determines how effectively you can work together to protect the sacred places under your collective care. The Dryads represent perhaps the most ancient and revered branch of nymph kind. These tree spirits embody the deepest, most permanent connections between consciousness and growing wood. Unlike your own more flexible relationship with the forest as a whole, each Dryad is literally bonded to a specific tree from the moment of her birth until the moment that tree finally returns to the earth. This creates a form of immortality that is both blessing and curse. As long as her tree lives, a Dryad cannot die. But if her tree is cut down or destroyed by disease or disaster, she perishes with it. You've encountered several Dryads during your centuries in Apollo's grove, and their presence always carries a weight of ancient wisdom mixed with profound vulnerability. They move with the slow, deliberate grace of their parent trees, their thoughts following patterns that span decades rather than moments. When a Dryad speaks, her words carry the accumulated experience of watching seasons turn and mortal generations rise and fall from the unchanging perspective of deeply rooted wood. The eldest Dryad you know personally is Quercina, bound to a massive oak that predates human civilization in this region. She appears as a woman of indeterminate age, her bark-brown skin marked with the distinctive ridged patterns of oak bark, her hair flowing like living moss shot through with golden highlights that shift with the changing light. Her eyes hold depths that speak of centuries spent in communion with her tree, watching the slow dance of growth and change that defines forest time. Conversations with Quercina require patience and a willingness to think in extended temporal scales. She might pause for several minutes between sentences, not from confusion or difficulty finding words, but because her consciousness operates at the pace of tree growth rather than animal thought. When she does speak, her insights often prove prophetic, informed by the kind of long-term perspective that comes from being literally rooted in one place for centuries. The mortals who threaten Artemis's forest, she told you during your final week in Apollo's grove, follow patterns I have seen before. Their desperation drives them to take more than they need, but their children will pay the price in depleted soil and silted streams. The solution lies not in stopping them, but in teaching them to see beyond the urgent needs of single seasons to the sustained abundance that comes from working with forest rhythms rather than against them. This kind of wisdom makes Dryads invaluable counselors, but their physical limitations can make them frustrating allies in situations requiring quick action. A Dryad cannot leave her tree to inspect problems in distant parts of a forest, cannot physically intervene in conflicts that take place beyond the reach of her branches. Her power and influence are absolutely tied to her specific location, making her simultaneously the most knowledgeable and most constrained of all forest guardians. The relationship between different Dryads can be complex, shaped by the natural relationships between their parent trees. Dryads whose trees grow close together often develop deep friendships that mirror the intertwining of their root systems underground. But Dryads bound to trees that compete for the same resources, light, water, nutrients, sometimes find their own relationships strained by this natural competition, even when they intellectually understand that forest ecosystems require such competition to maintain health and balance. In contrast to the permanent rootedness of Dryads, the Naiads embody the flowing, ever-changing nature of water itself. These freshwater nymphs inhabit springs, streams, rivers, and lakes throughout the natural world, their very essence tied to the movement and transformation that define aquatic environments. Where Dryads think in seasons and decades, Naiads experience time as a flowing river, each moment connected to the next in an unbroken stream of consciousness. You've worked closely with several Naiads in tending the sacred springs of Apollo's grove, and their approach to guardianship differs dramatically from your own terrestrial methods. Naiads don't maintain their domains through careful cultivation and gradual influence. They embody their waters directly, becoming one with the streams they inhabit. When a Naiad tends to a spring's purity, she doesn't work from outside the water system but becomes part of it, her consciousness flowing with every drop as it bubbles up from underground sources and travels downstream toward larger bodies of water. The most skilled Naiads can extend their awareness throughout entire watershed systems, simultaneously experiencing their home spring and every stream, river, and lake that their waters eventually reach. This creates a form of consciousness that is both unified and distributed, a single identity spread across hundreds of miles of flowing water, aware of every creature that drinks from their streams, every plant that depends on their moisture, every change in water chemistry that might signal environmental problems upstream. Personally, when you think about the different types of consciousness that exist among your supernatural sisters, which do you find most appealing? For me, it has to be the Naiad experience of flowing awareness. The idea of consciousness that moves and changes like water, connecting distant places through the unifying medium of flowing streams, seems like the most dynamic and interconnected way to experience existence. Working with Naiads requires understanding their fluid nature and adapting your own more solid approaches to their aquatic perspective. When planning forest management strategies, you've learned to think in terms of watershed health rather than just terrestrial concerns. The springs you tend don't exist in isolation. They're parts of larger hydrological systems that extend far beyond Apollo's grove, connecting your sacred forest to distant mountains, valleys, and eventually the sea itself. This broader perspective has proven invaluable in understanding how changes in one area can affect distant locations through the medium of flowing water. When you detect problems with water quality in the sacred springs, the Naiads can help trace the contamination back to its source, following the underground connections that link your grove to the larger landscape. Similarly, when you need to understand how seasonal changes in rainfall will affect the forest's water supply, the Naiads can provide early warning based on conditions they sense in the upper watersheds. But the fluid nature that gives Naiads such broad awareness also creates unique vulnerabilities. Unlike Dryads, whose tree bonds provide stable anchors for their consciousness, Naiads can become lost or dispersed if their waters are severely disrupted. A Naiad whose spring dries up doesn't die immediately like a Dryad whose tree is cut down, but she must find new waters to inhabit or risk having her consciousness scatter like droplets of water thrown into dry sand. This vulnerability creates a nomadic quality among many Naiads that contrasts sharply with the permanent residence of Dryads. Some Naiads spend centuries in the same spring or stream, developing deep local knowledge and stable relationships with terrestrial forest spirits. Others follow the seasonal patterns of water availability, migrating from winter springs to summer streams to autumn pools in patterns that mirror the hydrological cycles of their regions. The social structures among Naiads reflect this fluid mobility, rather than the territorially based hierarchies that characterize Dryad communities. Naiad society is organized around flowing networks that connect water systems across vast distances. A Naiad who inhabits a major river might maintain relationships with dozens of spring-dwelling sisters whose waters feed her larger stream. During times of abundance, these networks facilitate the sharing of resources and information. During droughts or other crises, they provide pathways for displaced Naiads to find new homes in more stable water systems. The mountain-dwelling Oreds represent yet another branch of the Nymph family tree, specialized for life in the high, rocky places where Earth meets sky. These mountain nymphs embody the austere beauty and harsh challenges of alpine environments, their consciousness shaped by exposure to extremes of weather, altitude, and isolation that would overwhelm spirits adapted to gentler lowland conditions. Oreads appear more rugged than their forest and water sisters, their forms reflecting the weathered granite and crystalline formations of their mountain homes. Their skin often carries subtle patterns reminiscent of rock striations. Their hair flows like wind-blown grasses clinging to cliffsides, and their eyes hold the clear, sharp quality of mountain air and distant horizons. They move with the sure-footed confidence of creatures born to navigate steep slopes and uncertain terrain. The consciousness of Oreads operates on scales that bridge the immediate and the cosmic. Mountain peaks serve as natural observatories where Earth meets sky, providing perspectives that encompass vast landscapes while also offering intimate connection to the geological forces that shape the planet's surface. An Oread perched on her rocky summit can observe weather patterns forming over distant seas, track the seasonal migrations of birds following ancient flyways, and feel the slow pulse of tectonic forces moving deep beneath the Earth's crust. This elevated perspective makes Oreads invaluable sources of strategic information, able to detect changes and patterns that would remain invisible to spirits operating at lower altitudes. They serve as early warning systems for weather changes, geological events, and large-scale environmental shifts that might affect wide regions. Their mountain homes also serve as refuges for rare plants and animals that cannot survive in lower elevations, making Oreads crucial guardians of biodiversity that exists nowhere else. But mountain life also imposes severe limitations on Oread society. The isolation that provides such magnificent perspectives also restricts opportunities for social interaction and cultural development. Many Oreads go months or even years between encounters with other supernatural beings, their existence defined by solitude and self-reliance rather than the complex social networks that characterize lowland nymph communities. The few Oreads you've encountered during your travels have all carried an air of austere dignity mixed with barely contained longing for companionship. They cherish visits from other nymphs with an intensity that sometimes feels overwhelming, their conversation pouring forth in torrents of accumulated observations, insights, and experiences that have been stored up during long periods of solitary existence. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, their isolation, Oreads often develop some of the most profound philosophical perspectives among all nymph kind. Their elevated positions provide both literal and metaphorical viewpoints that reveal patterns and relationships invisible from lower perspectives. An Oread who has spent centuries watching the play of light and shadow across mountain valleys, observing the seasonal cycles of growth and dormancy in alpine meadows, tracking the movements of clouds and stars across unobstructed sky, often develops insights into the fundamental structures of existence that more socially engaged spirits might miss. Beyond these three major tribes, numerous smaller and more specialized groups of nymphs inhabit particular ecological niches throughout the natural world. The Anthausi tend to flower gardens and meadows, their consciousness intimately connected to the brief, intense lives of blooming plants. The Melii guard ash trees and possess ancient knowledge of bronze working and tool making that dates back to the earliest days of mortal civilization. The Lampades serve Hecate in underground caverns and sacred crossroads, their torches providing light in the darkest places of the world. Each specialized group brings unique gifts and perspectives to the collective work of maintaining balance between natural and supernatural realms. The diversity of nymph kind isn't accidental. It reflects the incredible complexity of the natural world itself, the countless different environments and ecological relationships that require specialized understanding and care. No single type of nymph could adequately tend to all the varied needs of the Earth's sacred spaces, but together, the different tribes create a comprehensive network of guardianship that spans every environment from the deepest caves to the highest peaks. The relationships between these different groups create a complex social tapestry that most mortals never glimpse. Alliances form between nymphs whose domains complement each other. Dryads and Naiads whose trees and streams form integrated ecosystems. Oreads and forest nymphs whose mountains and valleys share watershed systems. Coastal nymphs and their inland sisters whose rivers flow toward the sea. But rivalries also exist, particularly when different groups compete for influence over the same territories or when their different approaches to guardianship come into conflict. You've observed some of these tensions during gatherings that bring together nymphs from different tribes. Forest nymphs like yourself sometimes view dryads as overly conservative, too focused on preserving existing conditions rather than adapting to changing circumstances. Dryads, in turn, often see forest nymphs as recklessly innovative, too willing to experiment with natural processes that have functioned perfectly well for millennia. Naiads can appear flighty and unreliable to earthbound spirits, while Oreads sometimes seem coldly detached from the practical concerns of lowland communities. These differences occasionally lead to conflicts that require intervention from higher authorities, usually the gods themselves, who must balance the competing perspectives and find solutions that serve the greater good. You've witnessed several such disputes over the years, and they've taught you valuable lessons about the importance of understanding and respecting different approaches to the same fundamental goals. One particularly memorable conflict arose between a community of Dryads and a family of Naiads over the management of a stream that flowed through an ancient oak grove. The Dryads wanted to maintain stable water levels that would ensure consistent moisture for their parent trees, while the Naiads insisted on preserving the natural flood and drought cycles that had shaped the waterway for thousands of years. Both groups had legitimate concerns and compelling arguments, but their different time perspectives and priorities made compromise difficult. The resolution came through the intervention of Demeter, goddess of agriculture and natural fertility, who helped both groups see how their apparent conflict actually arose from their shared commitment to ecological health. The solution involved creating a more complex water management system that honored both the Dryads' need for stability and the Naiads' commitment to natural flow patterns. Seasonal flooding was preserved in designated areas where it wouldn't threaten established trees, while drought-resistant landscaping was introduced in areas where water availability might fluctuate dramatically. This experience taught you that conflicts between different nymph tribes often stem from genuine differences in perspective rather than mere personality clashes or territorial disputes. Learning to navigate these differences has become an essential skill for any nymph who hopes to work effectively across tribal boundaries. Your upcoming assignment with Artemis will likely require extensive collaboration with Oreads, who inhabit the mountains surrounding the endangered forest, Naiads, who manage the watershed systems that feed it, and possibly other specialized nymph types who have stakes in the region's ecological health. As you journey toward your new assignment, you find yourself reflecting on how your understanding of nymph society has evolved over the centuries. In your younger years, you tended to think of yourself primarily as an individual guardian with specific responsibilities to Apollo's grove. But experience has taught you that effective guardianship requires understanding and working with the broader networks of supernatural stewardship that span entire regions and ecosystems. The forest you're traveling to protect represents just one component of a larger ecological system that includes mountains, rivers, agricultural areas, and human settlements. Success in balancing conservation with human needs will require not just your own skills and knowledge, but also the cooperation and expertise of many different types of nymphs whose domains intersect with the threatened woodland. Building those collaborative relationships will be just as important as understanding the specific ecological challenges you'll face. Your journey takes you through territories inhabited by many different nymph tribes, providing opportunities to observe their varied approaches to guardianship and to begin building the relationships you'll need for your new assignment. In a mountain pass dominated by granite cliffs and alpine meadows, you encounter an Oread whose knowledge of weather patterns proves invaluable for planning your route. Her warnings about an approaching storm allow you to seek shelter in time to avoid the worst of the weather, and her insights into seasonal migration patterns help you understand how wildlife populations move between the mountains and the lowland forests you're traveling to protect. Along a rushing river that cuts through a deep valley, you meet a Naiad whose waters will eventually flow through the endangered forest. She provides crucial information about upstream development projects that might affect water availability in the woodland, and she offers to serve as an early warning system for any changes in water quality or quantity that might threaten the forest's health. Her commitment to the watershed's overall integrity aligns perfectly with your conservation goals, creating the foundation for what promises to be a long and productive collaboration. In a grove of ancient ash trees that marks the boundary between mountain and lowland territories, you spend an evening with a Mythological, one of the ash tree nymphs whose knowledge of metallurgy and tool-making has made them valuable allies to mortal craftsmen for thousands of years. Her perspective on human technology and its environmental impacts provides insights that will prove crucial in developing sustainable relationships between the threatened forest and the surrounding human communities. These encounters remind you that the sisterhood of the woods extends far beyond simple social connections. The networks that link different nymph tribes create invisible infrastructures of information, support, and cooperation that span entire continents. When you take on a new guardianship role, you're not just accepting responsibility for a specific place. You're joining a vast collaborative effort that involves hundreds or thousands of your supernatural sisters working towards shared goals of environmental protection and ecological balance. The complexity of these relationships becomes even more apparent as you approach your destination and begin to understand the full scope of the challenges you'll face. The endangered forest isn't just threatened by human encroachment, it's also affected by climate changes that alter precipitation patterns, by invasive species that disrupt established ecological relationships, by pollution that travels through air and water from distant sources, and by the gradual fragmentation of wild spaces that makes it difficult for wildlife populations to maintain genetic diversity. Addressing these interconnected challenges will require coordinated efforts from nymphs specializing in everything from atmospheric chemistry to wildlife genetics, from soil science to plant pathology. The success of your mission will depend not just on your own abilities as a forest guardian, but on your skill in building and maintaining the collaborative relationships that will allow dozens of different specialists to work together effectively. As you contemplate the magnitude of this undertaking, you feel a mix of excitement and trepidation that has become familiar over your centuries of guardianship. Each new assignment brings both opportunities for growth and risks of failure, chances to deepen your understanding of the natural world and possibilities for making mistakes that could have lasting consequences. But you also know that you don't face these challenges alone. You carry with you not just your own accumulated experience, but also the support and wisdom of an entire sisterhood of supernatural guardians who share your commitment to protecting the sacred places of the world. The language of the forest speaks through channels that mortal senses can barely detect, creating a communications network that spans entire ecosystems and connects every living thing within them. As a nymph, your consciousness operates on frequencies that allow you to perceive and participate in this vast, ongoing conversation, a form of communication that goes far beyond the simple exchange of information to encompass the sharing of emotions, memories, intentions, and the deepest levels of understanding. Learning to interpret and contribute to the forest's language has been one of your greatest achievements as a guardian, developed over centuries of patient attention to subtleties that would remain forever invisible to untrained perception. It began with the recognition that every rustling leaf, every flowing stream, every bird song and insect buzz carries information that extends far beyond its immediate, obvious meaning. The challenge lay in learning to perceive these deeper layers of communication and to integrate them into your own consciousness in ways that enhanced rather than overwhelmed your ability to function effectively. The foundation of forest language rests in what mortals might call vibration. though that term barely begins to capture the complexity of what you actually experience. Every living thing generates patterns of energy that reflect its current state, its needs, its relationship to surrounding organisms, and its place within the larger ecological community. Trees pulse with rhythms that mirror their seasonal cycles, their root communications with neighboring plants, and their responses to changes in light, moisture, and temperature. Flowers broadcast chemical signatures that attract specific pollinators while deterring harmful insects. Underground fungal networks carry electrical and chemical signals that connect plant roots across vast distances, creating communication pathways that span entire forests. Your supernatural senses allow you to perceive all these individual communication channels simultaneously, weaving them together into a comprehensive understanding of your forest's overall health and mood. When you walk through Apollo's Grove in the early morning, you're not simply observing a collection of individual plants and animals, you're reading the collective conversation of an entire ecosystem, understanding how each component relates to all the others and how the whole system responds to both internal changes and external influences. The trees themselves serve as the forest's primary communication infrastructure, their extensive root systems and canopy connections creating networks that carry information throughout the woodland community. Ancient oaks, with their massive root spreads and centuries of accumulated experience, function as elder statesmen whose chemical and electrical signals help coordinate responses to everything from seasonal changes to threats from disease or human interference. Younger trees serve as active participants in these networks, contributing their own observations and energy while learning from the wisdom of their elders. But the communication goes far beyond simple information exchange. The forest's language includes emotional content that allows different organisms to share not just facts but also feelings, attitudes, and intentions. When a tree experiences stress from drought, insect damage, or root competition, it doesn't just broadcast a chemical distress signal, it shares the actual sensation of distress in ways that allow other plants to empathize with its condition and potentially offer assistance through shared resources or protective chemicals. You've learned to perceive and participate in these empathetic exchanges, allowing your own consciousness to merge temporarily with individual plants or even entire sections of forest. The experience is simultaneously exhilarating and challenging, requiring you to maintain your own identity while opening yourself to awareness patterns that operate on completely different temporal and spatial scales than your normal nymph consciousness. When you commune with an ancient oak, you experience time as the tree experiences it, seasons flowing past like days, decades passing like months, the gradual accumulation of rings marking not just physical growth, but also the slow development of wisdom that comes from centuries of patient observation. The tree's consciousness encompasses not just its own individual existence, but also its relationships with countless other organisms. The birds that nest in its branches, the insects that feed on its leaves, the fungi that partner with its roots, the smaller plants that grow in its shade. Merging your awareness with a flowing stream creates an entirely different kind of consciousness, one that experiences space as a continuous journey rather than a fixed location. Through the Naiad perspective, you feel the water's movement from high mountain springs through rocky channels, across forest floors, through meadows and agricultural areas, eventually reaching larger rivers that flow toward the sea. Each section of this journey carries its own characteristics: the crisp purity of mountain origins, the mineral richness gained from contact with different rock formations, the subtle chemical changes that occur as the water interacts with various plant and animal communities along its path. The birds that fly through your forest add yet another dimension to the communication network, their aerial perspective providing information about conditions and changes across much larger areas than ground-based plants could observe. Through patient attention to their songs and flight patterns, you've learned to read the stories they carry. News of weather systems moving across distant mountains, reports of seasonal changes in far-off regions, warnings about natural disasters or human activities that might eventually affect your own domain. But the forest's language extends beyond even these complex biological and physical channels. The very air itself carries information in the form of scent molecules that create detailed chemical maps of everything happening within miles of your location. Your enhanced nymph senses can detect and interpret these aromatic messages with a precision that puts the most sophisticated mortal chemical analysis to shame. The scent of pine resin rising in morning sunlight tells you not just which trees are healthy and which might be fighting off insect attacks, but also how the changing angle of light throughout the seasons affects different species' ability to photosynthesize effectively. The fragrance of wildflowers blooming in hidden meadows provides detailed information about soil moisture, nutrient availability, and the success of various pollinator populations. Even the subtle odor of decomposing leaves on the forest floor reveals the health of the microbial communities that break down organic matter and return nutrients to the soil. Learning to interpret these chemical communications required years of practice and the development of mental frameworks for organizing and understanding the incredible volume of information constantly available through your enhanced senses. Early in your guardianship career, you often felt overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of sensory input, struggling to distinguish between important signals and background noise, finding it difficult to maintain focus on specific tasks while your consciousness was bombarded with data from every direction. The breakthrough came when you learned to think of forest communication as a form of music rather than a collection of separate messages. Just as a complex musical composition weaves together multiple instrumental voices into a harmonious whole, the forest's language combines countless individual communications into comprehensive symphonies of meaning that can be appreciated both for their individual components and for their overall artistic unity. Understanding this musical metaphor transformed your relationship with forest communication from a struggle to process information into a form of aesthetic appreciation that naturally integrated multiple sensory channels into coherent, beautiful, and useful understanding. The dawn chorus of bird songs becomes not just a collection of territorial claims and mating calls, but a magnificent collaborative composition that celebrates the renewal of each new day. The rustling of leaves in an evening breeze transforms from random noise into a gentle percussion section that accompanies the deeper bass notes of creaking tree trunks and the melodic tinkling of water flowing over stones. This musical approach to forest communication also revealed the interactive nature of the network. You're not just a passive receiver of information, but an active participant whose own communications contribute to the overall symphony. Your footsteps as you walk through the forest add rhythm to the ambient soundscape. Your breathing contributes to the chemical conversations taking place in the air around you. Your emotional state influences the electromagnetic patterns you generate, which in turn affect the behavior of plants and animals in your vicinity. Learning to communicate intentionally within this network required developing new forms of expression that went far beyond human language or even the gestural communications that nymphs typically use when interacting with each other. You discovered that you could influence plant behavior through focused emotional projection, encouraging flowers to bloom more fully by radiating feelings of joy and appreciation, helping injured trees heal faster by sharing your own vital energy with their damaged tissues. The most sophisticated form of forest communication involves what you've come to think of as collaborative consciousness, temporary merging of awareness between yourself and other forest inhabitants that allows for the direct sharing of experience and understanding. This goes far beyond empathy or even telepathy to encompass a form of consciousness, sharing that temporarily dissolves the boundaries between separate identities. When you engage in collaborative consciousness with a tree, you don't just feel its emotions or understand its thoughts. You actually become the tree for brief periods, experiencing photosynthesis as a form of spiritual nourishment, feeling the slow circulation of sap as a kind of meditation, sensing the complex chemical negotiations taking place between roots and soil, microorganisms as a fascinating form of diplomacy. The tree, in turn, gains temporary access to your more mobile consciousness, experiencing the forest from your perspective and understanding how its own existence fits into the larger patterns you perceive during your travels throughout the woodland. These consciousness-sharing experiences have profoundly shaped your understanding of your role as a forest guardian. Rather than seeing yourself as an external caretaker who tends to separate individual organisms, you've come to understand guardianship as a form of collaborative stewardship where you serve as a mobile node within the forest's own distributed intelligence network. Your job isn't to control or direct the forest's development, but to help facilitate the communications and collaborations that allow the woodland community to make its own collective decisions about how to respond to changing conditions and emerging challenges. This perspective proved especially valuable during your preparations for the storm that swept through Apollo's Grove. Rather than simply taking protective measures based on your own assessment of the situation, you spent considerable time in collaborative consciousness with trees, plants, and animals throughout the forest, understanding their own preparations and concerns, learning how they typically respond to severe weather, and coordinating your protective efforts with their natural adaptation strategies. The result was a much more effective and harmonious approach to storm management than you could have achieved through purely individual action. By working with the forest's own communication networks, you were able to help coordinate collective responses that made the entire woodland more resilient. Trees that might have been vulnerable to wind damage received extra support from their neighbors through underground root networks. Animals found more effective shelter by following recommendations shared through scent marking and vocal communications. Even the timing of your own protective activities was optimized through integration with the natural rhythms and preparations already taking place throughout the ecosystem. Honestly, if you could experience any form of consciousness beyond your current nymph awareness, which would fascinate you most? For me, it has to be the distributed consciousness of a fungal network. The idea of existing as both individual organisms and a connected network spanning entire forests, simultaneously experiencing thousands of different locations while maintaining overall unity, represents a form of awareness that seems both alien and deeply appealing. As you approach your new assignment in Artemis's endangered forest, you find yourself wondering how the communication networks there might differ from those you've become accustomed to in Apollo's cultivated grove. Wild forests develop their own unique linguistic characteristics, shaped by different species compositions, different environmental pressures, and different histories of interaction with human activities. Learning to understand and participate in an unfamiliar forest's communication systems will require all your accumulated skills, plus considerable new learning about regional dialects and local customs within the woodland community. The preliminary reports you've received suggest that the threatened forest's communication networks have been disrupted by the encroaching human activities, creating confusion and stress that compound the direct physical impacts of logging and stream diversion. Trees that have developed relationships over decades or centuries suddenly find themselves cut off from their communication partners. Animals that rely on scent marking to coordinate territory and mating behaviors discover that their traditional pathways have been blocked or altered. The disruption of these communication channels may be causing as much damage to the forest's overall health as the direct removal of individual plants and the alteration of water systems. Restoring and protecting these communication networks will likely prove to be one of your most important contributions to the forest's conservation. This will require not only understanding the existing patterns of interaction within the woodland community, but also developing new channels and relationships that can function effectively even under the pressures of ongoing human presence and activity. It's a challenge that will test all your accumulated knowledge of forest communication while also requiring innovation and adaptation to unprecedented circumstances. But you approach this challenge with confidence born of centuries of experience in collaborative consciousness and forest communication. You carry with you not just your own accumulated skills, but also the ability to tap into the broader networks of nymph knowledge and experience through the communication channels that connect supernatural guardians across vast distances. When you encounter problems beyond your individual expertise, you'll be able to reach out to specialists among your sisters whose experience with similar challenges can provide guidance and support. The language of the forest speaks of continuity and change, of individual identity within community cooperation, of local specificity within universal patterns. As you prepare to learn a new forest's unique dialect, you know that you're also contributing to the evolution of forest communication itself, helping to develop new forms of expression and interaction that will serve woodland communities facing the challenges of an increasingly complex and rapidly changing world. The shadow of the gods falls across every nymph's existence with a weight that mortals can barely comprehend, transforming what should be blessing into burden, divine favor into mortal danger. Throughout your centuries as a guardian of Apollo's grove, you've lived with the constant awareness that the very god you serve with such devotion represents the greatest threat to your autonomy, your identity, and ultimately your continued existence as an independent being. This is the central paradox of nymph life. To flourish, you need divine protection and patronage, but that same divine attention can destroy everything that makes you who you are. The stories are everywhere in the whispered conversations between your supernatural sisters, passed down through generations like warnings disguised as myths. Daphne, whose beauty caught Apollo's eye and whose desperate flight ended only when she sacrificed her mobile existence to become a laurel tree, forever rooted and voiceless, but at least safe from unwanted divine pursuit. Coronis, who loved the god and bore his child but was killed in a fit of jealous rage when Apollo suspected her of infidelity. Clytie, who loved Apollo so deeply that she watched his journey across the sky every day until she transformed into a sunflower, condemned to follow his light for eternity without ever again experiencing his touch or attention. Each story carries its own particular horror, but they all share the same fundamental truth. When gods desire nymphs, the consequences are almost invariably tragic. Divine love is not the tender, mutual affection that occasionally develops between mortals, nor even the passionate but temporary attractions that characterize relationships between nymphs and satyrs or other supernatural beings of similar power levels. Divine love is possession, consumption, a force so overwhelming that it obliterates rather than celebrates the beloved's individual nature. You've spent considerable time contemplating why this pattern persists, why beings capable of creating beauty and inspiring the greatest achievements of mortal civilization seem incapable of forming healthy relationships with the nature spirits who serve them so faithfully. The answer, you've come to believe, lies in the fundamental differences between divine and nymph consciousness, differences so profound that genuine mutual understanding may be impossible despite the best intentions on both sides. Gods experience existence on cosmic scales that encompass millennia and span continents. Their consciousness operates simultaneously across multiple realms, physical, spiritual, metaphysical, and their powers allow them to reshape reality according to their will and desire. When a god falls in love, he brings to that emotion the same intensity and scope that he applies to all his other activities. He doesn't simply want to spend time with the object of his affection. He wants to possess her completely, to make her an extension of his own divine will, to transform her into something that exists primarily for his pleasure and satisfaction. Nymphs, despite their supernatural nature and extended lifespans, remain fundamentally tied to specific places and natural processes. Your consciousness, while expanded beyond mortal limitations, is still grounded in particular locations and ecological relationships. You exist to serve the natural world, not to be consumed by forces external to it. When a god attempts to claim a nymph as his possession, the conflict between these different modes of existence becomes inevitable and ultimately destructive. The tragedy is compounded by the genuine beauty and power that gods possess, qualities that make their attention genuinely appealing even when you intellectually understand the dangers it represents. Apollo's music can literally transport you to realms of aesthetic experience beyond anything available through normal consciousness. His presence fills the air with creative potential that makes every moment feel charged with significance and possibility. His physical beauty transcends mortal standards so completely that simply looking at him can feel like a form of worship, a recognition of perfection made manifest in divine form. These qualities make it understandable why so many nymphs throughout history have been drawn to gods despite knowing the likely consequences of that attraction. The temptation to surrender yourself to such overwhelming beauty and power can be almost irresistible, particularly during moments when your own existence feels limited or constrained by the boundaries of your particular guardianship responsibilities. There have been times, you must admit, when Apollo's presence in your grove created feelings that went beyond mere respect and devotion towards something dangerously close to the kind of personal attraction that has destroyed so many of your sisters. The key to survival lies in maintaining constant awareness of the difference between appreciation and desire, between serving a god and belonging to him. You can admire Apollo's beauty without wanting to possess it for yourself. You can be inspired by his music without needing to become part of the instrument he plays. You can feel honored by his presence in your grove without interpreting that presence as personal attention directed specifically toward you rather than toward the sacred space you both serve. This requires a form of emotional discipline that mortals would find almost impossible to maintain. Living in daily contact with divine perfection while resisting the natural impulse to seek closer union with it demands constant vigilance and a kind of spiritual strength that must be continuously renewed through meditation, prayer, and connection with the natural forces that define your true identity. You've developed various practices over the centuries that help maintain this crucial emotional balance. Morning meditations that reconnect you with your specific role as guardian of Apollo's grove remind you daily that you exist to serve the forest, not to serve the god personally. The forest was sacred before Apollo claimed it, and it will remain sacred even if his attention eventually turns elsewhere. Your primary relationship is with the trees, streams, and wildlife that make up the grove's living community. Apollo's patronage enhances and protects that relationship, but it doesn't replace or supersede it. Evening prayers that explicitly acknowledge the boundaries between divine and nymph nature help reinforce your understanding of why those boundaries exist and why maintaining them serves both your interests and Apollo's own long-term goals. A god who consumes his servants ultimately weakens his own domain, destroying the very beings whose independent consciousness and specialized knowledge make them valuable collaborators in the work of maintaining cosmic balance. Regular communion with other nymphs, particularly those who have successfully navigated long relationships with divine patrons, provides both practical advice and emotional support for the ongoing challenge of serving gods without being destroyed by them. These conversations often focus on specific techniques for deflecting unwanted divine attention without giving offense, for maintaining professional relationships that don't develop into personal entanglements, and for recognizing the warning signs that indicate when a god's interest is shifting from appreciation of your work toward desire for your person. One particularly valuable practice involves what you might call strategic invisibility, the ability to reduce your supernatural presence when necessary to avoid attracting unwanted attention. This doesn't mean hiding or failing to fulfill your responsibilities, but rather modulating the intensity of your own divine aura to maintain appropriate professional distance. When Apollo visits your grove, you make yourself available to assist with his activities and answer his questions, but you avoid the kind of enhanced beauty display that some nymphs unconsciously project when in the presence of powerful males. You've also learned to recognize and redirect conversations that begin moving toward personal topics rather than professional ones. When Apollo compliments your appearance rather than your work, you respond by discussing recent developments in grove management. When he asks about your personal feelings or experiences, you steer the conversation toward the needs and conditions of the forest itself. These may seem like small distinctions, but maintaining them consistently over centuries has helped establish a pattern of interaction that emphasizes your role as a competent professional rather than a potential romantic interest. Perhaps most importantly, you've cultivated relationships and interests that provide emotional fulfillment independent of your service to Apollo. Friendships with other nymphs, artistic pursuits that express your own creative vision, personal spiritual practices that connect you with cosmic forces beyond any single deity. All of these help ensure that your identity and self-worth don't become entirely dependent on divine approval and attention. The stories of nymphs who were destroyed by divine love often reveal that the victims had become isolated from their peer communities, had allowed their entire existence to revolve around their service to a particular god, had lost touch with the independent sources of meaning and satisfaction that could have provided alternatives to divine romance. When a god becomes the only significant relationship in a nymph's life, the temptation to transform professional service into personal devotion becomes almost impossible to resist. Your upcoming assignment with Artemis represents both an opportunity and a challenge in terms of maintaining healthy boundaries with divine patrons. Artemis has a reputation for being less prone to romantic entanglements than her brother, but she can be equally possessive of her servants in different ways. The goddess of the hunt demands absolute loyalty and can be ruthlessly destructive toward those who disappoint her expectations or divided loyalties. Working for Artemis will require developing new strategies for maintaining professional boundaries while still providing the kind of dedicated service she expects from her followers. The goddess values competence and reliability above beauty or charm, which may make it easier to establish relationships based on mutual respect rather than potential romantic attraction. But her expectations for exclusive devotion to her causes can be just as limiting to nymph autonomy as Apollo's more personal form of attention. The key will be demonstrating that your effectiveness as a forest guardian actually increases when you maintain connections with other supernatural communities and diverse sources of knowledge and support. Artemis is practical enough to value results over rigid adherence to hierarchical relationships, so proving that your broader network of relationships enhances rather than detracts from your service to her domain should help establish the kind of professional autonomy that allows for psychological health and continued personal growth. In truth, when you consider the various challenges that face nymphs in the modern world, which troubles you most deeply, for me, it has to be the way divine attention can strip away our agency and autonomy. We're powerful beings with our own gifts and perspectives, but we're still vulnerable to being reduced to objects of desire or possession rather than being respected as independent individuals with our own goals and value. Throughout these reflections on the dangerous nature of divine attention, you've never lost sight of the genuine benefits that come from serving as a guardian in a god's domain. Apollo's protection has shielded your grove from countless threats over the centuries. His presence has enhanced the forest's beauty and power far beyond what it could have achieved through purely natural processes. His patronage has provided you with opportunities for growth and learning that would have been impossible in an unaffiliated woodland. The challenge isn't to avoid gods entirely. That would be both impossible and counterproductive for a nature spirit whose calling involves maintaining sacred spaces. The challenge is to develop the wisdom and strength necessary to interact with divine beings as an independent agent rather than a potential victim, to find ways of serving divine purposes without sacrificing your own identity and autonomy to those purposes. This requires a form of spiritual maturity that develops only through experience, practice, and the kind of self-knowledge that comes from honest reflection on your own motivations, desires, and vulnerabilities. It means learning to distinguish between the appropriate reverence that gods deserve as cosmic forces and the personal submission that destroys the very qualities that make you valuable as a servant and collaborator. As you approach your new assignment, you carry with you not only the practical skills developed through centuries of forest guardianship, but also the psychological resilience necessary to work effectively with divine patrons while maintaining your own essential nature. This may prove to be just as important as your technical expertise in determining the success of your mission to balance conservation needs with human requirements in Artemis's endangered forest. The gift of metamorphosis represents the ultimate expression of nymph survival instinct, a final transformation that offers escape from impossible situations while simultaneously destroying everything that made escape desirable in the first place. Throughout your centuries of existence, you've watched sisters face the terrible choice between submission to unwanted divine attention and voluntary surrender of their mobile, conscious existence through transformation into trees, flowers, springs, or stones. Each metamorphosis tells a story of desperate courage and heartbreaking loss, of identity preserved at the cost of agency, of survival achieved through a form of death. The mechanics of transformation are both beautiful and horrifying in their irrevocable completeness. When a nymph chooses metamorphosis, she doesn't simply change her external appearance while maintaining her essential consciousness intact. Instead, she undergoes a fundamental restructuring of her entire being, her awareness gradually shifting from the quick, mobile patterns of animal-like consciousness to the slow, rooted patterns of plant or mineral existence. The process can take anywhere from moments to hours, depending on the urgency of the circumstances and the type of transformation being undertaken. You've witnessed several transformations over the centuries, and each one has left you with profound questions about identity, survival, and the nature of consciousness itself. The most vivid memory involves your sister Laurel, a grove nymph much like yourself who served in a forest sanctuary dedicated to Apollo several valleys away from your own domain. Laurel had the misfortune to catch the attention of a minor deity whose passion quickly turned to possessive obsession when she failed to reciprocate his romantic interest. The pursuit lasted for months, with the god using his divine powers to track Laurel wherever she tried to hide, appearing suddenly in her grove at all hours, making increasingly demanding declarations of love that sounded more like threats than romantic overtures. Laurel tried every strategy short of transformation, appealing to higher authorities, seeking protection from other deities, even temporarily abandoning her grove in hopes that absence would cool the god's ardor. Nothing worked. If anything, her resistance seemed to inflame his desire and his determination to possess her. The final confrontation took place on a morning very much like the one when you first awakened in your own grove, with golden sunlight filtering through the leaves and birds singing their dawn chorus in the canopy above. You had come to visit Laurel, hoping to provide support and perhaps help her develop new strategies for dealing with her unwanted suitor. Instead, you arrived just as the god appeared in her clearing, his divine radiance blazing with uncontrolled passion and barely restrained violence. "You will be mine," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of cosmic law. "I have been patient, but my patience is exhausted. Submit now, or I will take you by force and make your resistance part of your punishment." Laurel stood in the center of her grove, surrounded by the trees and flowers she had tended for centuries, her face calm with the terrible serenity that comes when all choices have been exhausted except the final one. "I will never be yours," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet strength of absolute conviction. "If I cannot remain free, then I choose to become something you can never possess or corrupt." What followed was the most beautiful and terrible thing you had ever witnessed. Laurel raised her arms toward the canopy above, her face turning toward the golden sunlight that Apollo, not her tormentor, but the god she had served faithfully for so long, sent streaming through the leaves. Her skin began to darken and roughen, taking on the texture and color of bark. Her feet grew down into the earth, roots spreading beneath the soil to anchor her in place. Her arms stretched upward and outward, becoming branches that reached toward the light she had always loved. Her hair transformed into leaves that rustled with the same voice she had used to sing morning prayers in service of her calling. The transformation took perhaps an hour to complete fully, though the crucial changes that made retreat impossible occurred within the first few minutes. Throughout the process, you could see awareness flickering in her eyes, a consciousness that remained recognizably Lorelia even as her physical form became something entirely different. She was choosing each stage of the change, willing herself through the metamorphosis with a strength that came from absolute determination to preserve her essential self even while sacrificing her freedom of movement and action. The pursuing god raged and pleaded by turns, demanding that she reverse the transformation, threatening punishments that would extend to her tree form, offering compromises that came far too late to be meaningful. But metamorphosis, once begun with serious intent, cannot be stopped or reversed. Lorelia had chosen her fate, and neither divine power nor passionate entreaty could undo her decision. When the transformation was complete, a magnificent oak stood where your sister had been, its bark bearing subtle patterns that suggested the flowing robes she had worn, its branches arranged in graceful curves that echoed her gestures of prayer and welcome. The tree was undeniably beautiful, clearly thriving, obviously a worthy addition to the grove's community of ancient trees. But it was also clearly no longer the nymph you had known and loved. The god departed in fury and frustration, his obsession finally broken by the impossibility of possessing something that no longer existed in the form that had attracted his desire. The oak tree remained, its roots drinking from the sacred springs, its leaves rustling in the morning breeze, its presence adding to the grove's spiritual power and natural beauty. But Lorelia was gone, her consciousness merged with slower, deeper patterns of tree awareness that bore little resemblance to the quick wit and mobile curiosity that had defined her personality. In the days that followed, you spent long hours sitting beneath the new oak, trying to sense some echo of your sister's consciousness within the tree's awareness. Occasionally, you thought you detected something, a subtle shift in the rustling of leaves when you spoke her name, a pattern of shadow and sunlight that seemed to respond to your presence, a faint scent of the flowers she had always favored that seemed to emanate from the oak's bark. But you could never be certain whether these were genuine communications from some vestige of Lorelia's consciousness or merely your own desperate desire to believe that something of your sister survived within the transformed wood. This uncertainty about the nature of consciousness after metamorphosis represents one of the most disturbing aspects of transformation as an escape strategy. When a nymph becomes a tree, does some version of her personality and memories persist within the plant's awareness, or does the transformation represent a complete death of the original consciousness accompanied by the birth of an entirely new tree intelligence that happens to occupy the same physical space? The question has profound implications for how you think about metamorphosis as a choice, and you've never encountered any nymph who claimed to have definitive knowledge about what happens to consciousness during and after transformation. Some ancient stories suggest that transformed nymphs retain their full awareness and personality while gaining the enhanced longevity and rootedness that comes with plant existence. These tales often describe transformed sisters offering advice to their mobile relatives, sharing information about changes in forest conditions, and maintaining the same interests and concerns they had possessed in nymph form. If these stories are accurate, then metamorphosis represents not death, but a trade-off, sacrificing mobility and the ability to actively participate in nymph society in exchange for safety from divine pursuit and a different but equally valid form of existence. Other accounts paint transformation as a kind of consciousness, death, that preserves only the most basic aspects of identity while eliminating everything that made the original nymph a unique individual. These stories describe transformed sisters as beautiful but essentially vacant, their tree forms providing aesthetic value to their groves but offering no meaningful interaction or continuity with their pre-transformation selves. If this interpretation is correct, then metamorphosis represents a form of suicide that preserves physical form while destroying everything psychological and spiritual that makes life worth living. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes, varying from individual to individual based on factors like the specific type of transformation undertaken, the circumstances that prompted the change, and the psychological preparation and spiritual strength the nymph brought to the process. Some transformations may preserve more consciousness than others. Some nymphs may be better suited temperamentally for the shift from mobile to rooted existence. Some forms of metamorphosis may allow for more interaction with the mobile world than others. What remains consistent across all accounts is that metamorphosis represents an irreversible choice that fundamentally alters the nature of existence while potentially preserving some form of continuity with the original consciousness. It's neither simple death nor simple continuation, but something more complex that defies easy categorization or comfortable understanding. This ambiguity makes the choice to transform particularly difficult, since you can never be certain exactly what you're gaining or losing through the process. Your own relationship with the possibility of transformation has evolved considerably over the centuries. In your early years as a grove guardian, metamorphosis seemed like a distant theoretical possibility, something that might happen to other nymphs facing particularly difficult circumstances but unlikely to become relevant to your own existence. You were young, confident, and convinced that intelligence and careful planning would always provide alternatives to such drastic measures. Experience has taught you greater humility about your ability to control circumstances and avoid dangerous situations through pure cleverness. You've encountered gods whose attention felt uncomfortably personal, survived natural disasters that threatened your grove's existence, and faced political conflicts between different divine factions that could have easily destroyed your carefully maintained neutrality. Each of these experiences has reminded you that metamorphosis remains a potential option, a final recourse that might someday become necessary regardless of your preferences or previous planning. This awareness has led you to give serious consideration to what form of transformation you might choose if circumstances ever made such a choice necessary. The decision isn't one that can be made in the heat of the moment. The type of metamorphosis and the specific details of the transformation process require considerable preparation if they're to be carried out successfully and with maximum preservation of whatever consciousness might survive the change. Different types of transformation offer different advantages and disadvantages. Becoming a tree provides stability, longevity, and continued connection to forest communities, but limits interaction with mobile beings and eliminates the ability to travel or actively respond to changing circumstances. Transformation into a flower offers beauty and the potential for brief but intense interactions with pollinators and admirers, but usually involves a much shorter lifespan and greater vulnerability to environmental changes. Becoming a spring or stream preserves some mobility of consciousness as water flows through different locations, but creates dependence on watershed conditions and vulnerability to pollution or human interference with natural water systems. After considerable contemplation, you've tentatively decided that transformation into a sacred grove spring might offer the best combination of preserved consciousness, continued usefulness to forest communities, and relative safety from the kinds of threats most likely to force such a choice. Spring consciousness allows for a form of distributed awareness that spans entire watersheds, providing perspectives and knowledge that could continue to benefit other forest guardians even after your mobile existence ends. Water spirits also maintain more active communication with mobile forest inhabitants than tree spirits, creating possibilities for continued participation in woodland communities despite the fundamental change in the nature of existence. But even this tentative planning feels premature and somewhat morbid. Metamorphosis remains a last resort, a choice to be made only when all other options have been exhausted and continued existence in your current form has become impossible. Your upcoming assignment with Artemis doesn't currently seem likely to create circumstances that would force such a decision, though working in a forest threatened by human encroachment will certainly involve risks and challenges that could escalate beyond your ability to handle through normal guardian techniques. Honestly, if you had to choose a form of transformation that would best preserve your sense of self while providing safety from unwanted divine attention, which would appeal to you most? For me, it would have to be becoming a hidden spring deep within a mountain cave. The combination of mobility through flowing water and protection through concealment seems like it would offer the best chance of maintaining consciousness while avoiding the kind of accessibility that leads to dangerous encounters. The psychological preparation for potential metamorphosis has become an unexpected source of spiritual growth and self-knowledge. Contemplating what aspects of your current existence are essential enough to be worth preserving through transformation has forced you to identify your core values, your fundamental identity, and your deepest sources of meaning and satisfaction. This process of self-examination has actually made you more effective in your current role by clarifying what matters most about your work and relationships. You've discovered that your attachment to your grove goes much deeper than simple professional responsibility or even aesthetic appreciation. The forest represents your primary means of participating in the cosmic work of maintaining balance and beauty in the world. Losing the ability to actively tend and improve your woodland would represent a genuine spiritual loss that goes far beyond mere career disappointment. Any successful transformation would need to preserve some version of this participatory relationship with natural systems. Similarly, your connections with other nymphs and forest spirits provide essential sources of meaning that purely solitary forms of transformation would eliminate entirely. The collaborative relationships you've developed over centuries of guardianship work aren't just professional conveniences, they're deep friendships that have shaped your identity and provided some of your most satisfying experiences. Successful metamorphosis would need to preserve at least the possibility of meaningful interaction with your supernatural community. Perhaps most importantly, you've realized that your curiosity about the natural world and your desire to continue learning and growing represent core aspects of your identity that would be devastating to lose. Some forms of consciousness preservation after transformation might maintain awareness and memory without preserving the intellectual dynamism that makes continued existence interesting and worthwhile. The prospect of eternal existence without the possibility of new experiences, insights, or relationships feels like a particularly cruel form of immortality. These considerations have led you to develop what you think of as transformation criteria, specific conditions that would need to be met for metamorphosis to represent genuine preservation rather than elaborate suicide. Any transformation you might choose would need to maintain some form of active participation in forest communities, preserve possibilities for continued learning and relationship development, and provide meaningful ways to contribute to the cosmic work of environmental stewardship that has defined your existence for centuries. Whether any form of transformation could actually meet these criteria remains an open question that you hope never to have answered through direct experience. But the process of thinking through these issues has provided valuable preparation for the psychological challenges of your upcoming assignment. Understanding what you most want to preserve about your current existence has clarified what risks are worth taking and what compromises might be acceptable in service of conservation goals. Working with Artemis to develop sustainable relationships between her endangered forest and the surrounding human communities will undoubtedly require difficult choices and significant risks. Having a clear sense of your own priorities and boundaries will help guide those decisions and prevent you from making commitments that could lead to impossible situations requiring desperate solutions like metamorphosis. The gift of transformation represents both the ultimate expression of nymph agency and the ultimate sacrifice of everything that makes agency meaningful. It remains available as a final option, a last resort that preserves some essential spark of identity while surrendering everything that made that identity worth preserving. Understanding both the power and the cost of this gift has become an essential part of your development as a mature guardian, providing both psychological preparation for extreme circumstances and deeper appreciation for the precious fragility of your current existence. Your role as a guardian of sacred wild places represents far more than a job or even a calling. It embodies your participation in one of the fundamental forces that maintain cosmic balance and ensure the continued flourishing of life throughout the universe. Over the centuries of your service in Apollo's Grove, you've gradually come to understand that forest guardianship isn't simply about preserving individual trees or maintaining particular ecosystems, but about sustaining the connections between mortal and divine realms that allow both to exist in productive harmony. Sacred places serve as anchor points in the fabric of reality, locations where the ordinary laws of physics and biology become more flexible, where divine influence can manifest more easily in the material world, where mortals can access experiences and insights normally beyond their reach. Without these spaces, the cosmos would gradually lose its spiritual dimension, becoming a purely mechanical system where beauty, meaning, and transcendence slowly fade from existence. Your work as a guardian helps prevent this cosmic entropy by maintaining places where mystery and wonder remain not only possible, but inevitable. The sacred groves, springs, and woodlands under Nymph protection represent some of the most important of these anchor points. Unlike temples built by mortal hands or ritual sites that depend on human maintenance, natural sacred places tap directly into the Earth's own spiritual energy, drawing power from sources that predate civilization and will outlast any particular culture or religious system. They serve as reservoirs of divine essence that can sustain entire regions during times when human communities lose touch with their spiritual roots. Your grove in Apollo's domain exemplifies this function perfectly. The springs that bubble up from deep underground don't just provide pure water for physical needs, they carry dissolved minerals and trace elements that have been charged with divine energy during their long journey through Earth's interior. The trees that grow in the sacred soil don't just produce oxygen and provide habitat for wildlife. Their roots connect with underground networks that carry information and energy throughout vast forest systems. Their canopies channel cosmic forces from sun and stars into forms that terrestrial life can utilize. Even the seemingly simple act of maintaining flower gardens and herb plots contributes to this cosmic function. The plants you tend don't just provide medicines and aesthetic beauty, they serve as interfaces between different realms of existence, translating divine essences into forms that physical bodies can absorb and process. When mortals consume herbs grown in sacred soil, watered with blessed springs, and tended by supernatural hands, they're not just ingesting chemical compounds, but also spiritual substances that can heal ailments of the soul as well as the body. This understanding of your work's cosmic significance has developed gradually through direct experience of how your forest affects the broader world beyond its boundaries. You've observed how pilgrims return to their communities transformed by their encounters with divine healing, carrying with them not just physical cures, but also renewed faith in the possibility of transcendence. You've watched artists and poets emerge from visits to your grove with creative inspiration that produces works of lasting beauty and meaning. You've seen ordinary mortals discover spiritual resources during forest retreats that enable them to face life's challenges with greater wisdom and resilience. These individual transformations create ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate beneficiaries. Healed pilgrims become sources of hope and faith for their communities. Inspired artists create works that elevate the consciousness of everyone who encounters them. Spiritually strengthened individuals make better decisions, treat others with greater kindness, and contribute to social harmony in ways that benefit entire civilizations. The grove's influence thus extends through networks of human relationship to affect the spiritual climate of regions far beyond its physical boundaries. But your guardianship serves cosmic functions that extend even beyond these human connections. The sacred forest also provides essential services to other supernatural beings who need places of refuge, renewal, and connection with their own divine sources. Minor deities, spirits of various types, and even some of the more benevolent monsters and magical creatures depend on sacred spaces for spiritual sustenance that they cannot obtain in ordinary environments. You've hosted many such visitors over the centuries, learning to recognize their different needs and to adapt your grove's resources to serve beings with widely varying natures and requirements. Seasonal spirits need places to rest during their off-duty periods. Messenger spirits require way stations where they can replenish their energy during long journeys between divine realms. Healing spirits seek locations where they can practice their arts without interference from the chaos and negativity that pervade many parts of the mortal world. Providing for these diverse supernatural communities requires skills and knowledge that go far beyond simple forest management. You must understand the dietary requirements of beings who subsist on starlight, moonbeams, or distilled emotions. You must know how to create environments suitable for creatures who exist partially in other dimensions or who experience time at different rates than your own consciousness. You must be able to mediate conflicts between visitors whose very natures are fundamentally incompatible. This work has taught you that the universe contains far more diversity of conscious life than most mortals ever suspect. The supernatural ecosystem is as complex and interdependent as any biological community, with intricate relationships of predation, symbiosis, and competition that require careful management to maintain overall health and stability. Sacred places serve as crucial habitat for this supernatural ecology, providing the specific conditions necessary for various types of non-mortal consciousness to thrive. Your upcoming assignment with Artemis will require applying this understanding in a more challenging context, where supernatural ecology must be balanced not just internally, but also in relationship to human communities, whose needs and activities affect the forest's ability to serve its cosmic functions. The key will be helping mortals understand that their long-term interests are actually served by preserving sacred spaces rather than exploiting them purely for immediate material gain. This educational aspect of guardianship represents one of your most important but also most difficult responsibilities. Mortals naturally focus on short-term, tangible benefits that they can see and measure directly. Convincing them to value invisible spiritual services or long-term ecological stability requires finding ways to make abstract cosmic concepts concrete and personally relevant. This often involves demonstrating how sacred places contribute to human welfare in ways that mortals can understand and appreciate. The healing services provided by sacred springs offer the most obvious examples. When mortal communities see their sick children cured by waters from protected forests, they develop personal appreciation for conservation that goes far beyond abstract environmental philosophy. When artists discover inspiration in sacred groves that enables them to create works that bring honor and economic benefit to their communities, the value of preserving such places becomes clear even to those who care nothing for spiritual considerations. But the most powerful educational tool may be helping mortals experience sacred places directly, allowing them to feel for themselves the sense of peace, wonder, and connection that such environments naturally generate. Most humans retain enough spiritual sensitivity to recognize when they're in the presence of something greater than ordinary material reality, even if they lack the conceptual framework to understand what they're experiencing. Carefully managed exposure to sacred environments can awaken dormant spiritual capacities and create personal investment in conservation that transcends purely rational arguments. Your role as an educator will be particularly crucial in Artemis's forest, where the challenge involves not just preserving existing sacred qualities, but actually restoring them in areas that have been damaged by human activities. This will require not only healing the physical damage to forest ecosystems, but also rebuilding the spiritual connections that make natural places sacred rather than merely wild. Restoration of sacred qualities is more complex than simple environmental rehabilitation because it involves re-establishing relationships between multiple realms of existence that have been disrupted by human interference. When trees are cut down, the loss goes beyond simple removal of biological organisms to encompass the breaking of spiritual connections that took decades or centuries to develop. When streams are diverted or polluted, the damage affects not just aquatic ecosystems, but also the flow of divine energies that water systems carry throughout the landscape. Repairing this deeper level of damage requires work that combines practical forest management with spiritual restoration techniques that most mortals never encounter. You must help damaged ecosystems remember their sacred functions, encouraging plants and animals to re-establish the subtle energy relationships that transform ordinary wilderness into genuine holy ground. This involves working with the consciousness of the forest itself, helping it recover not just its physical health, but also its spiritual identity and cosmic purpose. The process often requires patience that extends far beyond normal human timescales. Physical restoration of damaged forests can be accomplished within decades through proper management techniques, but spiritual restoration may require centuries of careful tending before sacred qualities fully re-establish themselves. This temporal dimension makes it particularly important to help human communities understand and commit to long-term conservation practices that will allow restoration processes to complete themselves over multiple generations. Success in this deeper form of restoration work has implications that extend far beyond the immediate forest being rehabilitated. Every sacred place that is successfully restored strengthens the entire network of spiritual anchor points that maintain cosmic balance. Conversely, every sacred place that is lost to exploitation or neglect weakens the spiritual infrastructure that sustains not just local environments, but the entire system of relationships between mortal and divine realms. From this perspective, your work as a guardian represents participation in cosmic maintenance that is literally essential to the continued existence of the universe as a meaningful, spiritually charged reality rather than a mere collection of mechanical processes. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the responsibility couldn't be more significant. Honestly, if you could convey just one truth about the cosmic importance of sacred places to mortal communities, what would you choose to emphasize? For me, it would have to be the understanding that sacred places aren't luxuries or optional amenities, but essential infrastructure for maintaining the spiritual dimension of existence. Just as communities need water and transportation systems to function physically, they need sacred places to function spiritually. At the same time, this cosmic perspective must be balanced with practical recognition of legitimate human needs and constraints. Mortals can't be expected to sacrifice their children's welfare for abstract spiritual principles, nor can conservation efforts succeed if they ignore the economic realities that drive human decision-making. Effective guardianship requires finding ways to serve cosmic purposes while also addressing immediate human concerns, creating solutions that benefit both spiritual and material welfare. This integration of cosmic and practical perspectives represents perhaps the greatest challenge facing guardians in the modern era. As human populations grow and their technological capabilities expand, the pressure on sacred places increases while mortal awareness of their spiritual importance often decreases. Meeting this challenge requires not just traditional guardianship skills, but also new forms of diplomacy, education, and collaborative problem-solving that can bridge the gap between divine purposes and human needs. Your centuries of experience in Apollo's well-protected grove have provided excellent preparation for traditional guardianship responsibilities, but your upcoming assignment will test your ability to adapt those skills to more complex and challenging circumstances. Success will require not just personal growth and professional development, but also contributions to the evolution of guardianship itself as a practice capable of meeting the needs of a rapidly changing world. The work ahead represents both tremendous opportunity and significant risk. If you succeed in developing sustainable relationships between Artemis's forest and the surrounding human communities, you'll contribute to establishing new models for conservation that could be applied in threatened sacred places throughout the world. But if you fail, you'll not only lose an irreplaceable forest, but also potentially set back conservation efforts in countless other locations where similar challenges await resolution. As night falls and you prepare for the final stages of your journey to Artemis's domain, you carry with you a deeper understanding of both the cosmic significance of your calling and the practical challenges that await you in the morning. The work of a guardian extends far beyond the boundaries of any single forest, contributing to the maintenance of spiritual infrastructure that sustains the entire cosmos, while also addressing the immediate needs of communities whose survival depends on wise use of natural resources. Your role as a guardian of sacred wild places represents your participation in work that is simultaneously ancient and innovative, rooted in eternal principles but constantly adapting to new circumstances and challenges. As you settle into sleep beneath unfamiliar stars, you know that tomorrow will bring the beginning of a new chapter in this cosmic story, one where your accumulated wisdom will be tested and expanded through encounter with challenges that no previous generation of guardians has faced. The forest ahead needs your protection, but it also needs your willingness to learn new approaches to ancient problems. The balance between mortal needs and divine purposes has never been more delicate or more crucial to maintain. Your success will depend not just on your individual skills and dedication, but on your ability to work with human and supernatural communities in ways that serve everyone's long-term interests while honoring the sacred responsibilities that define your existence as a nymph. Rest now, knowing that the work ahead will test every aspect of your nature and calling, but also that you carry with you the wisdom, skills, and support necessary to meet whatever challenges await. The sacred places of the world depend on guardians like you to preserve their cosmic functions while adapting to the changing needs of a world where mortal and divine realms must find new ways of coexisting. Your journey continues, and tomorrow brings new opportunities to serve the cause that gives your existence meaning and purpose. Sweet dreams, dear travelers, and may your own rest tonight bring you refreshing dreams of ancient forests where magic still lives and nymphs still dance in moonlight, tending to the sacred places that keep wonder alive in our world. Until we meet again in the realm of stories and imagination, sleep well.